knowing when to stop talking, even if no one tells you to. You can say the smartest thing in the room and still lose everyone by saying it one sentence too late. That is the part nobody warns you about. It is not about what you say. It is about knowing when your moment is over. Here is what is uncomfortable. People almost never tell you when you have crossed that invisible line. They nod. They smile. They say yeah or interesting. And while you are still talking, they are already gone. The punishment is silent. The room cools. Eye contact breaks. The energy shifts. And later you cannot explain why that conversation never turned into a connection, a callback, or an opportunity. Most people think talking more equals being more interesting. So, when they feel nervous, they fill the space. When they feel excited, they keep going. When they finally feel heard, they hold on too long. But socially, silence is not empty. Silence is a signal. It is where the other person decides if they want more of you or less of you. You have probably felt this on the other side. Someone tells a story that starts strong. You are leaning in. Then they keep adding details that do not matter. They explain things you already understand. They circle back to the same point. And without realizing it, your brain checks out. You are still there physically, but emotionally you are done. That is the exact moment this rule is broken. Psychologically, this happens because attention is a limited resource. The brain is constantly asking, is this still worth my focus? When a speaker does not notice the subtle cues of disengagement, like shorter responses, wandering eyes, less mirroring the listener feels drained instead of connected. That drain gets associated with the person, not the moment. Here is the part that hurts. The person who talks too long is usually not arrogant. They are usually trying to connect. They want to be understood. They want to add value. They think if they just explain a little better, the connection will lock in. But socially, impact comes from restraint, not completion. The people who feel magnetic are not the ones who finish every thought. They leave things slightly unfinished. They stop while the interest is still rising. They notice when the energy peaks and they exit right there. That creates pull. It leaves the other person wanting to respond, ask, or continue later. This is why some people get invited back and others slowly fade out. It is not about dominance or intelligence. It is timing. Ending a thought early signals confidence. It tells the room you do not need to convince anyone. You trust the moment to stand on its own. And the worst part is you are punished for breaking this rule without ever being told. No confrontation, no feedback. Just fewer texts, shorter conversations, less enthusiasm next time. People label it as something vague like exhausting or off or just not my vibe. Once you see this rule, you start noticing how often it happens. Meetings where one person keeps talking and everyone else mentally checks out. First dates that go long but never lead to a second. Group conversations where one voice slowly takes up too much space and the group unconsciously pushes them to the edges later. The shift happens when you start listening for the end instead of pushing past it. You watch for micro signs. The pause that is a chance to stop. The laugh that is an exit point. The moment where your point landed and anything more would only dilute it. When you learn to stop talking before you are finished, people lean in instead of away. They remember you as sharp, not long-winded, and they want more of you because you did not take more than you were given. Not correcting someone publicly, even when they're wrong. You have probably watched this happen in real time. Someone says something wrong in a group. Not a big dramatic mistake. Just slightly off. and instantly your brain lights up with the correction. You know the right answer. You feel it sitting on your tongue. There is a tiny rush that comes with being right. So you jump in and fix it. Clean, accurate, polite even. And the room changes in a way you did not expect. No one argues with you. No one says you were rude. But the person you corrected goes quiet. Other people stop engaging as much. The conversation loses warmth. Later you wonder why being correct somehow made you less liked. Here is the social shock most people never see coming. In many situations, accuracy matters less than emotional safety. When you correct someone publicly, you are not just fixing information. You are challenging their social standing in front of others, even if your tone is calm, even if your intention is helpful. The brain of the person being corrected does not hear help. It hears exposure. Humans are deeply wired to avoid public loss of face. Anthropologists call this face preservation. Losing face signals vulnerability to the group. It threatens status. That threat triggers defensiveness or withdrawal. So when you correct someone in front of others, their nervous system reacts before logic ever gets a chance to speak. The invisible rule is simple, but harsh. If someone is wrong in public, and it does not cause immediate harm, you are expected to let it go or fix it privately. When you break that rule, people do not see you as smart. They see you as unsafe. What makes this rule painful is that it goes against how many people are taught to operate. In school, you are rewarded for raising your hand with the right answer. In debates, you win by pointing out flaws. In work settings, you are told accuracy matters. All of that is true in structured environments. Social environments run on a different currency. In unspoken social hierarchies, the person who maintains harmony often outranks the person who proves a point. When you publicly correct someone, you unintentionally signal that being right matters more to you than how others feel. That signal sticks. Think about the last time someone corrected you in front of others. Even if they were right, you probably felt a flicker of embarrassment, maybe irritation, maybe the urge to explain yourself. That emotional spike is what the group registers, not the facts. The mood shift becomes associated with you. Psychologists talk about something called emotional contagion. Emotions spread faster than information. When a correction creates tension, the group absorbs that tension and looks for the source. Subconsciously, they mark the person who caused it. This is why the punishment is subtle. You are not called out. Instead, people stop sharing half-formed thoughts around you. They become more guarded. They do not brainstorm freely. You become the person people edit themselves around. That is social distance forming in real time. There are exceptions, emergencies, safety issues, situations where being wrong has real consequences. In those moments, correction is expected. But most everyday conversations are not that. They are about bonding, identity, shared understanding. In those moments, being right is less important than being aligned. High social intelligence looks like restraint. It looks like letting a small inaccuracy pass because the relationship matters more, or asking a question instead of issuing a correction, or waiting until the moment has passed and speaking privately. These moves protect dignity, and dignity is social currency. People who seem effortlessly respected often do this without thinking. They know when a correction will elevate the group and when it will shrink someone. They choose silence, not because they are unsure, but because they are aware. If you have ever wondered why someone less knowledgeable than you seems more popular, this is often why. They make people feel competent, safe, unthreatened. That feeling outweighs raw intelligence in most social settings. This rule is especially punishing because the person breaking it often has good intentions. You want clarity. You want truth. You want to help. But socially, intentions matter less than impact. And the impact of public correction is usually a loss of trust. Once you notice this, you start seeing it everywhere. Meetings where one person dominates by correcting others. Friend groups where one member is always fact-checking the vibe. Online spaces where being technically right replaces being human. And you see how quickly people pull away. The shift happens when you start asking a different question. Not is this correct, but is this worth correcting here and now? That pause alone changes everything. When you stop correcting people publicly, you gain something unexpected. People listen to you more when you do speak. They value your input. They feel safe enough to be wrong around you, and that safety creates influence. Because in the invisible world of social rules, the goal is not to win moments. It is to win relationships. And the fastest way to lose one is to be right at the wrong time. Pretending to laugh when everyone else is laughing. It usually happens fast. A joke lands. The room reacts instantly. Laughter spreads before your brain even finishes processing the words. You feel it rush past you like a wave you somehow missed. There is a split second where you realize you did not find it funny. Not confusing, not offensive. Just not funny. And in that tiny gap you make a decision almost without thinking. You smile. You let out a small laugh. You join in. No one notices. That is the point. You passed the test. Here is the uncomfortable truth. You were not laughing because it was funny. You were laughing because silence would have been louder. This is one of the most common invisible social rules and one of the most punishing when broken. When everyone laughs together and you do not, you stand out immediately. Not as someone with a different sense of humor, but as someone out of sync. Humans are hypersensitive to sync. It signals belonging. Laughter is not just a reaction to humor. It is a social glue. Psychologically, laughter functions as a bonding mechanism. It releases tension. It signals agreement. It tells the group, I am with you. When you do not laugh, you unintentionally signal distance. The group may not consciously judge you, but their nervous systems register something is off. That is why people fake laugh even when they do not want to. Not because they are dishonest, but because they are socially fluent. The shock is realizing how little humor actually matters in these moments. The content of the joke is secondary. What matters is the shared reaction. When you break that shared reaction, the moment becomes awkward, not because you did anything wrong, but because you disrupted emotional alignment. Think about the last time someone did not laugh when everyone else did. Maybe they stayed neutral. Maybe they looked confused. The room probably felt tighter for a moment. People glanced at them. Someone might have explained the joke. That explanation was not about clarity. It was about repairing the break. Silence after a joke creates a vacuum, and humans rush to fill vacuums. There is a concept in social psychology called normative conformity. People unconsciously match the behavior of the group to avoid standing out. Laughter is one of the fastest ways this happens because it is contagious and low effort. You do not need to understand the joke to laugh. You just need to recognize the cue. When you refuse to follow that cue, people interpret it in different ways. They may think you are judging the joke, or judging them for laughing, or trying to signal superiority. Even if none of that is true, the interpretation sticks. That is where the punishment comes in. It is subtle but real. People stop joking as freely around you. They become more self-conscious. They adjust their tone. You are not excluded outright. You are buffered, kept at a slight emotional distance. What makes this rule especially cruel is that it puts authenticity and belonging at odds. We are told to be genuine, to not fake reactions. But socially complete authenticity is often expensive. Humans bond through shared illusions all the time. Pretending to laugh is one of the smallest and most common. This does not mean you have to perform exaggerated laughter or betray your values. It means understanding that a soft smile or light chuckle is often a social courtesy, not a moral compromise. There is also timing. If you never laugh, people notice. If you always laugh, people trust it less. The invisible skill is knowing when the laughter is about humor and when it is about harmony. Watch high social intelligence people closely. They laugh easily, but not loudly. They mirror the energy of the group. They know when to lean in and when to stay neutral. They rarely leave a joke hanging even if it did not land for them personally. If you have ever felt drained after social events, this might be why. Constantly calibrating reactions takes effort, but the alternative can cost more. Being perceived as cold, distant, hard to read. The real damage happens when someone consistently refuses to play along. Not out of principle, but out of unawareness. They believe their neutral face says nothing. In reality, it says, "I am not with you." Over time, that message accumulates. This rule shows up everywhere. Work meetings where one person never laughs at the boss. Friend groups where inside jokes go unacknowledged. Family dinners where one member stays stone-faced while everyone else shares a moment. Each time the group adapts by sharing less. Once you see this, you also notice the power of laughter used intentionally. Laughing a little early can relax a tense room. Laughing with someone can protect them after a weak joke. Laughing lightly can smooth over discomfort. These are social tools, not deceptions. The shift happens when you stop asking, "Did I find this funny?" and start asking, "What is happening emotionally right now?" That awareness gives you choice. You can decide when to join and when to stay silent without accidentally sending the wrong signal. Because in the invisible economy of social rules, laughter is less about comedy and more about coordination. And pretending to laugh is often not about lying. It is about choosing connection over isolation in moments where the group is quietly asking, "Are you with us?" Matching the emotional energy of the room. You can walk into a room and feel it instantly. Before anyone says a word, you already know the temperature. Maybe it is calm and focused. Maybe it is tense. Maybe it is playful. And then there is you, your mood, your pace, your energy. If those two things do not line up, something feels wrong, even if no one can explain why. That mismatch is one of the fastest ways to become socially invisible or quietly disliked. Here is the part most people do not expect. You are not judged just for what you say or do. You are judged for the emotional volume you bring into a shared space. Too high or too low, and the room pushes back. This rule hits hardest because it feels unfair. You might be excited, or serious, or tired, all valid human states. But socially, the group expects you to tune yourself to them, not the other way around. When you fail to do that, the punishment is subtle but immediate. Imagine walking into a low-energy, serious meeting full of people focused on a problem. You come in upbeat, talking fast, cracking jokes. No one tells you to stop. They smile politely, but their attention never fully lands on you. You feel ignored, or worse, tolerated. Now flip it. Everyone is relaxed, laughing, sharing stories. You enter heavy, quiet, intense. You ask deep questions. The laughter dies down. People shift in their seats. Again, no one says anything. But the mood deflates. In both cases, you broke the same invisible rule. You did not match the emotional energy of the room. Humans are emotional regulators for each other. Groups naturally seek equilibrium. When someone brings an energy that is out of sync, the group experiences it as friction. Not dramatic conflict, just discomfort. And the fastest way groups reduce discomfort is by distancing from the source. Psychologically, this ties into something called affective synchrony. Humans subconsciously mirror emotional states to feel safe and connected. When that mirroring fails, the brain reads it as unpredictability. Unpredictability feels risky. Risk reduces trust. This is why people often say someone feels off without being able to explain why. It is not about personality. It is about emotional alignment. What makes this rule especially punishing is that it is context dependent. The same energy that makes you magnetic in one setting can make you awkward in another. High enthusiasm works at a party. It can feel invasive in a quiet workspace. Calm seriousness works in planning sessions. It can feel draining at a celebration. Socially fluent people do not have one consistent energy. They have range. If you have ever felt like you are always a little out of place, this might be why. You are showing up as yourself without first reading the emotional room. Authenticity without calibration often reads as self-centered, even when it is not meant to be. There is also a power dynamic here. Higher status individuals often set the emotional tone. Lower status individuals are expected to adapt. When someone ignores that hierarchy and brings their own energy anyway, it can feel like a challenge. Again, not consciously, but emotionally. Think about someone who stays overly calm when everyone else is stressed. That can feel grounding or dismissive depending on timing. Think about someone who stays hyped when everyone else is exhausted. That can feel motivating or exhausting. The difference is not intention. It is alignment. The punishment for missing this rule is rarely direct. Instead, people stop including you in moments where emotional cohesion matters. They do not invite you to decompress. They do not confide. They keep interactions surface level. You become someone they manage rather than connect with. This rule is brutal because it requires attention outward, not inward. When you are anxious or excited or low energy, your focus naturally turns inward. But socially, that is exactly when calibration matters most. Emotion matching does not mean suppressing yourself completely. It means adjusting your entry speed, listening first, letting the room tell you how loud or quiet to be emotionally. Watch people with high social intelligence when they enter new spaces. They pause. They observe. Their first few contributions are small. They test the waters. Only then do they fully engage. That pause is doing a lot of work. There is also a misunderstanding that matching energy means faking emotions. It does not. You can be tired and still soften your tone. You can be excited and still slow your pace. These are micro adjustments, not betrayals of self. Once you become aware of this rule, you start seeing how often it is broken. The coworker who vents when everyone else is solution-focused. The friend who stays sarcastic during serious moments. The person who brings intensity into casual spaces. And you notice how the group subtly pulls away. The shift happens when you stop asking, "How do I feel?" and start asking, "How does this space feel right now?" That question alone changes how you are perceived. When you match the emotional energy of the room, people relax around you. They feel understood without knowing why. They open up. They trust your timing. You become someone who fits. Because in the invisible world of social rules, belonging is not about being loud or quiet, happy or serious. It is about resonance. And when your emotional frequency matches the room, the signal is clear. You belong here. Not asking, why, when the answer could embarrass someone. There is a specific kind of question that sounds innocent on the surface and detonates quietly underneath the room. It usually starts with genuine curiosity. Something does not add up. A detail is missing. So you ask the most natural question in the world. Why? Why did that happen? Why did you do it that way? Why not something else? And instantly the atmosphere shifts, even though your tone was calm and your intention was clean. No one accuses you of anything. No one says you crossed a line, but the person you ask tightens. Their answer gets shorter. The room gets quieter. And later you are left wondering how a single word managed to do so much damage. Here is the shock. Why is not a neutral question in social settings. It is a spotlight. When you ask why in front of others, you are not just requesting information. You are forcing someone to justify themselves publicly. That activates shame faster than almost any other social cue, even if they did nothing wrong. Humans are wired to protect their competence and image in groups. When someone is put on the spot and cannot easily explain their reasoning, their brain interprets it as exposure. The body reacts before the mind can reason through it. Heart rate spikes. Shoulders tense. Defensiveness comes online. This is why feels so different from what or how. Those questions explore. Why interrogates. The invisible rule is simple. If the answer could reveal ignorance, weakness, or a mistake, you are expected to avoid asking why publicly. Or at least soften it enough that it does not corner someone. When you break this rule, people do not think you are curious. They think you are threatening. What makes this rule brutal is that it punishes intelligence and honesty. Smart people notice gaps. They want clarity. They are taught that asking questions is good. And it is. Just not without social awareness. Think about a meeting where someone presents an idea that clearly has a flaw. You ask why they chose that approach. In your mind, you are opening a discussion. In their nervous system, they hear you questioning their competence in front of everyone who matters. Even if they have a good reason, the moment feels like a test they did not prepare for. The punishment is subtle but lasting. That person becomes guarded around you. They explain less. They share safer ideas. Others notice the tension and subconsciously mark you as someone who creates it. Psychologically, this ties into something called face threat. Face is the image we project of being capable and respectable. When face is threatened publicly, people focus on protecting themselves, not collaborating. Your why question unintentionally triggers that defense. This rule shows up everywhere. A friend tells a story about a breakup, and you ask why they stayed so long. A coworker misses a deadline, and you ask why they did not speak up sooner. A family member makes a choice you do not understand, and you ask why they would do that. Each time you think you are seeking understanding. Each time they feel exposed. Notice how often people respond to why with justifications rather than explanations. They feel the need to defend, not share. That is your clue. High social intelligence looks like reframing. Instead of why did you do that, it becomes what was going on for you then. Instead of why did this happen, it becomes what factors played into it. These questions invite information without assigning blame. People who consistently ask why publicly often get labeled as intense or judgmental, even when they are not. Conversations around them become cautious. Others preemptively explain themselves to avoid being questioned. That drains trust. The cruel part is that the person asking why rarely notices the cost. They get their answer. The damage happens quietly afterward in how people feel around them. There are moments where why is appropriate. Private conversations, coaching relationships, situations where psychological safety is already established. But in mixed or public settings, why is a high-risk move. If you have ever felt like people shut down around you after you asked a reasonable question, this is likely why. You accidentally triggered shame, not insight. This rule is especially punishing because it asks you to prioritize emotional safety over logical clarity. And for analytical minds, that feels backwards. But socially, clarity comes after safety, not before it. Watch people who are trusted leaders. They rarely ask why in public. They ask, how can we understand this better? Or what led to this outcome? They remove the sense of personal exposure. As a result, people open up instead of bracing. Once you see this, you start noticing how often why is used as a weapon disguised as curiosity. You also notice how often it backfires, even when there is no malicious intent. The shift happens when you pause before asking why and imagine how the answer would sound coming from someone who feels embarrassed. If that image makes you uncomfortable, you already have your answer. When you stop asking why in moments that could corner someone, you gain something powerful. People feel safe thinking out loud around you. They admit uncertainty. They share context. You get better information, not worse. Because in the invisible world of social rules, the goal is not to expose truth at all costs. It is to create conditions where truth can actually be shared. And knowing when not to ask why is one of the quiet skills that separates people others trust from people others brace against. Acting interested in conversations you didn't choose. Sometimes you end up in a conversation you never signed up for. You did not lean in. You did not ask the question. You did not steer the topic. Yet here you are trapped between politeness and boredom, while someone talks about something you did not choose and do not care about. And in that moment you feel the internal resistance rise. Your face goes neutral. Your responses shorten. You start scanning for exits. And without realizing it, you just broke a rule. The shock is this. Socially, it does not matter who chose the conversation. It matters how you behave once you are in it. The moment you disengage visibly, you are no longer neutral. You are communicating rejection. Humans are extremely sensitive to interest cues. Eye contact, head nods, small verbal affirmations. These signals tell the speaker you are safe to continue. When they disappear, the speaker does not think you are bored. They think you are judging them, or worse, dismissing them. That reaction happens fast and mostly below awareness. The speaker feels smaller, exposed, slightly foolish for talking in the first place. Even if they know the topic is niche or unimportant, the lack of interest lands as a personal slight. This is why acting uninterested is quietly punished, even when you did nothing wrong. The invisible rule is that once someone is speaking to you, you are expected to carry your side of the emotional labor. That means showing enough interest to keep the interaction socially intact, not because the topic deserves it, but because the person does. What makes this rule painful is that it feels dishonest. Why pretend to care about something you do not? But socially, the interest is not about the subject. It is about acknowledgement. You are signaling, I see you. Not, I love this topic. Psychologically, this ties into validation. Humans seek confirmation that they matter in small, everyday ways. When someone talks and receives flat responses, their brain interprets it as social rejection. The same neural pathways activate as physical pain. That is not metaphorical. It is measurable. So when you check out mentally and physically, the other person feels it. And even if they cannot name it, they associate that feeling with you. The punishment is subtle. They stop initiating conversations with you. They keep things short. They do not volunteer information. Others may notice the awkwardness and distance themselves too. You become someone people do not feel good talking to. This rule shows up constantly at work. Someone explains a process you already know. A colleague shares a hobby you do not care about. A relative tells a story you have heard before. Each time you face the same choice: engage lightly or withdraw. Many people withdraw thinking honesty equals authenticity. But socially, authenticity without generosity often reads as cold. High social intelligence looks like selective curiosity. You do not need to fake enthusiasm. You need to offer presence. That can be as simple as asking one neutral follow-up question, or reflecting back a detail, or acknowledging effort. Think about how it feels when you talk and someone clearly is not interested. You rush. You apologize. You wrap up quickly. That discomfort stays with you longer than the conversation itself, and you remember who made you feel that way. This is why the rule exists. Groups survive on small acts of mutual attention. When someone consistently refuses to offer it, they become socially expensive. There is also a power dynamic here. People with higher perceived status can get away with disengaging more. Their attention is treated as scarce. Everyone else is expected to contribute interest as a form of social currency. When someone opts out without earning that status, it feels like entitlement. This is especially punishing for people who value efficiency. You might think, why waste energy on conversations that do not matter? But socially, the conversation matters less than the relationship it maintains. Acting interested does not mean sacrificing yourself. It means recognizing that you are participating in a shared emotional economy. Small investments keep it functioning. You have probably noticed people who are universally liked often seem curious about everything. Not because they are, but because they know how to make others feel heard. That skill opens doors intelligence alone does not. If you have ever wondered why people stop opening up around you even though you are polite, this might be why. Politeness without engagement feels empty. It checks the box, but does not nourish the interaction. The shift happens when you stop evaluating conversations by their usefulness and start evaluating them by their impact. Did the person leave feeling respected, seen, at ease? Once you adopt that lens, something changes. You realize you can guide conversations gently without rejecting them. You can shorten them without dismissing them. You can protect your energy without signaling disinterest. Because in the invisible world of social rules, attention is not just a personal resource. It is a social signal. And acting interested in conversations you did not choose is less about the topic and more about maintaining the quiet agreements that keep people willing to connect with you at all. Understanding when honesty is socially unacceptable. There is a moment when honesty feels powerful. You notice something no one else is saying. You feel the truth pressing against your chest. It feels authentic, clean, almost noble. So you say it. You are not cruel. You are not dramatic. You are just honest. And immediately something breaks. The room stiffens. Faces freeze. Someone changes the subject too fast. You feel it in your stomach before you can explain it logically. You told the truth. So why does it feel like you just committed a social crime? Here is the shock most people never fully absorb. Honesty is not automatically virtuous in social settings. Timing, context, and emotional cost matter more than accuracy. When honesty threatens group stability, it stops being seen as integrity and starts being seen as danger. There is an invisible rule that governs almost every human interaction. Truth is welcome only when it protects connection or improves outcomes. When it risks humiliation, conflict, or emotional harm without consent, it becomes unacceptable, and the punishment for crossing that line is rarely direct. It is social withdrawal. What makes this rule especially confusing is how often we are taught the opposite. Be honest. Say what you think. Speak your truth. Those ideas work in moral philosophy and therapy. Social life runs on a different operating system. Imagine someone asks how they look right before an important event. You notice something unflattering. You say it plainly. Technically, you helped. Socially, you just introduced anxiety where confidence was needed. The group now has to manage the emotional fallout. That cost gets silently assigned to you. Or think about pointing out an uncomfortable dynamic in a group setting. You name the tension out loud. You are right. Everyone feels it. But now it is exposed. No one was ready. You did not relieve tension. You amplified it. Psychologically, humans prioritize emotional regulation over factual accuracy in groups. This is not weakness, it is survival. Groups function when people feel safe. When honesty threatens that safety, the brain flags the source. This ties into something called social containment. Groups unconsciously suppress truths that could destabilize relationships, power structures, or identities. When someone violates that containment, they are seen as disruptive, even if they are correct. That is why honesty often gets punished, not praised. The punishment looks like this. People stop asking your opinion. They preface conversations carefully around you. They say things like, "I probably should not say this, but." You are not trusted with emotional ambiguity. You become someone who makes things real too fast. What makes this rule brutal is that the honest person often has good intentions. They value clarity. They dislike pretense. They believe truth will ultimately help, and sometimes it does. But socially, consent matters. Uninvited honesty feels like an ambush. There is also a difference between honesty that serves the speaker and honesty that serves the situation. Many people confuse relief with righteousness. Saying the truth feels good to you. That does not mean it was good for the group. Think about the last time someone was brutally honest with you when you were vulnerable. Even if they were right, the timing probably hurt. You may have respected them less, not more. That emotional memory lingers. High social intelligence is not about lying. It is about filtering. It is about asking one quiet question before speaking. Does this truth need to be said now, here, and by me? If the answer is no, silence is not dishonesty. It is restraint. People with influence understand this deeply. They do not dump raw truth into unprepared spaces. They frame it, delay it, or move it to private settings. As a result, people feel safe around them, even when difficult conversations eventually happen. This rule shows up everywhere. Someone shares good news, and you immediately point out a risk. Someone is proud of progress, and you highlight what is still lacking. Someone vents emotionally, and you offer logical truth. Each time you think you are helping. Each time you are violating emotional timing. The group response is predictable. Distance. This does not mean you should never be honest. It means honesty is a tool, not a reflex. Used well, it builds trust. Used carelessly, it erodes it. Notice how trusted people deliver truth. They soften entry. They check readiness. They signal care first. The honesty lands because the relationship can hold it. Once you see this rule, you start noticing how often honesty is performative, used to signal intelligence, courage, or superiority rather than care. And you notice how quickly those people lose social capital. The shift happens when you stop treating honesty as a moral absolute and start treating it as a responsibility. Truth has weight. Dropping it without regard for where it lands is not strength. It is negligence. When you learn when honesty is socially unacceptable, something surprising happens. People trust you more with their real thoughts, because they know you will not expose them carelessly. You become someone who can hold complexity without forcing resolution. And in the invisible world of social rules, that is power. Not the power of always speaking the truth, but the power of knowing when the truth needs time, silence, or consent before it can actually be heard. Not pointing out awkward silences. There is a moment everyone recognizes, but almost no one handles well. The conversation stalls, words run out, the space between sentences stretches just a little too long. Your brain starts scrambling for something to say. And then someone does it. They point to the silence. They laugh nervously and say, "Well, this is awkward." Or, "Wow, quiet in here." And somehow the silence gets heavier instead of lighter. That is the mistake. Here is the shock. The silence itself was not the problem. Pointing it out was. Awkward silences are not inherently awkward. They are neutral. What makes them uncomfortable is when someone names them and forces everyone to feel responsible for fixing them. The moment you point out the silence, you turn a passing pause into a shared social failure. Humans are deeply sensitive to social flow. Conversation is supposed to move. When it stops briefly, the group usually recalibrates on its own. Someone thinks. Someone breathes. Someone changes direction. Silence is often just transition. But when you call attention to it, you interrupt that natural reset. Psychologically, this ties into something called self-awareness escalation. When silence is pointed out, everyone suddenly becomes aware of themselves in the group. How they look. What they should say. Whether they are being judged. That spike in self-consciousness is what creates the discomfort people associate with awkwardness. So the invisible rule is simple. You are expected to let silence pass without naming it. When you break that rule, people feel exposed. What makes this rule especially punishing is that the person pointing out the silence is usually trying to help. They want to lighten the mood. They want to acknowledge what everyone is feeling. But socially, that acknowledgement does the opposite. It traps the feeling instead of releasing it. Think about the last time someone pointed out an awkward silence. Did it actually fix anything? Or did it make everyone laugh briefly and then feel even more pressure to perform? That pressure lingers. The punishment is subtle but real. People start feeling tense around you in quiet moments. They rush to fill space. They avoid pauses. You become associated with discomfort even though your intention was relief. Silence in social settings serves a purpose. It gives people time to think. It allows emotions to settle. It marks transitions. Confident groups tolerate silence. Insecure groups rush to eliminate it. When you point out silence, you signal insecurity. Not personal insecurity necessarily, but discomfort with uncertainty. That signal ripples outward. There is also a status element. High-status individuals rarely acknowledge awkwardness. They let pauses exist. Their comfort with silence signals control. Lower-status behavior often looks like nervous commentary filling every gap. This is why interviews, meetings, and dates feel different depending on who holds the silence. The person who does not rush it subtly leads the interaction. If you have ever been in a conversation with someone who stays calm during pauses, you probably felt more relaxed. If you have been with someone who panics during silence, you felt the tension, even if you could not explain why. The rule is especially brutal for people who are socially anxious. Anxiety hates silence because silence feels like judgment. So the urge to point it out feels relieving in the moment. But socially it backfires. This rule shows up everywhere. On first dates, when someone jokes about running out of things to say. In meetings, when someone comments on how quiet it got. In group chats, when someone says, "Guess everyone is busy." Each time the silence itself was manageable. Naming it made it heavier. Silence is only awkward when you tell people it is. High social intelligence looks like letting silence breathe. Maybe you sip your drink. Maybe you look around calmly. Maybe you ask a new question without referencing the pause. These moves reset the interaction without assigning blame. People who are skilled socially understand that silence is a shared space, not a problem to solve. They trust that something will emerge, or that nothing needs to. If you have ever felt like conversations die around you, this might be why. Not because you are boring, but because you rush to rescue moments that did not need saving. That urgency creates pressure. Pressure kills ease. The shift happens when you reinterpret silence. Instead of seeing it as failure, you see it as neutral, or even useful. That reframing alone changes how you show up. Next time a pause happens, notice what your body wants to do. Does it tense? Does your mouth open automatically? Do you want to joke about it? That urge is the habit. Let it pass. When you stop pointing out awkward silences, something surprising happens. They stop feeling awkward. Conversations find new paths. People relax. You appear more grounded without saying anything at all. Because in the invisible world of social rules, comfort with silence signals confidence, awareness, and emotional steadiness. And breaking that rule by naming the pause does not fix discomfort. It creates it. Silence is not a crack in the conversation. It is part of the structure. And knowing when to leave it alone is one of the quiet skills that makes people feel at ease around you, even when nothing is being said. Respecting hierarchy without it being explicitly stated. You can feel it before you can explain it. You walk into a room and something invisible is already arranged. Who speaks first? Who listens more? Who jokes freely? Who stays measured? No one announces these roles. No one votes. But they exist anyway. And the moment you misread them, something subtle goes wrong. You did not insult anyone. You did not break a rule that was written down. Yet afterward the energy toward you cools. People respond a little slower. You are no longer fully inside the circle. That is the punishment for ignoring a hierarchy no one told you about. Here is the shock. Every group has a hierarchy, even the ones that insist they do not. Even casual friend groups. Even creative teams. Even families that claim everyone is equal. The hierarchy may not be about titles. It may be about tenure, confidence, social skill, expertise, or emotional influence. But it is there, and respecting it is expected. What makes this rule especially dangerous is that it operates silently. You are never told who holds influence. You are expected to sense it. When you fail to do so, people do not correct you. They downgrade you. Hierarchy is not always about power. Often it is about permission. Who can tease whom? Who can interrupt whom? Who can challenge ideas publicly? These permissions are unevenly distributed. When someone acts as if they have permission they have not earned, it feels like a violation, even if their point is valid. Think about speaking too confidently in a room where others have more experience, or joking casually with someone who sets the tone for the group, or challenging a decision before the group has accepted you as someone who can do that. Even if your content is good, the timing feels wrong. And timing is everything. Psychologically, humans are status tracking machines. We constantly and unconsciously assess who leads and who follows. This is not cruelty, it is coordination. Groups function more smoothly when roles are stable. When someone disrupts that stability too early, the group feels threatened. That threat does not look like anger. It looks like distance. The invisible rule is this: until a group grants you influence, you are expected to observe more than assert. When you skip that phase and act as if you already belong at the top, you signal either ignorance or arrogance. Neither is rewarded. What makes this rule brutal is that it often punishes confidence. You might be encouraged to speak up, be bold, take initiative, and those traits are valuable. But without social calibration, they backfire. Confidence that ignores hierarchy reads as disrespect. This is why newcomers who talk too much too soon often struggle, even if they are competent. The group has not yet placed them, so their behavior feels disruptive rather than impressive. Hierarchy also explains why the same behavior is praised in one person and criticized in another. A senior member challenges openly and is seen as strong. A newer member does the same and is seen as difficult. The action did not change. The position did. This rule shows up constantly at work, in meetings where one voice carries more weight, in creative spaces where one person sets taste, in social circles where one person anchors the group. You can disagree with the hierarchy morally, but socially you still have to account for it. Ignoring it does not make you principled. It makes you costly. The punishment is subtle but lasting. People stop backing your ideas. They do not advocate for you when you are not there. They frame your contributions cautiously. You become someone who needs managing rather than trusting. There is also a misunderstanding that respecting hierarchy means being submissive. It does not. It means sequencing. You earn freedom by first showing awareness. You listen, you align, you add value without challenging status, and over time the group relaxes around you. Watch people who rise quickly in groups. They rarely dominate early. They ask questions. They mirror tone. They let others lead. Then slowly they are invited upward. The hierarchy shifts to include them. People who try to force their way up trigger resistance instead. This rule is especially punishing for people who value fairness. You might think everyone should be treated the same, and ethically that makes sense. Socially, groups do not run on ethics. They run on stability. Hierarchy reduces friction. When someone ignores it, friction increases. The group responds by pushing them out, not because they are bad, but because they are disruptive. Once you become aware of this rule, you start seeing how often people misstep. The new hire who challenges leadership too fast. The friend who treats everyone as equal before earning intimacy. The outsider who jokes like an insider. And you see how quickly the group tightens. The shift happens when you stop asking, "What do I want to say?" and start asking, "Where am I in this group right now?" That awareness changes everything. Respecting hierarchy does not mean silencing yourself. It means choosing when to speak and how. It means understanding that influence is granted, not claimed. And once it is granted, you gain far more freedom than you would by pushing early. Because in the invisible world of social rules, hierarchy is always present even when it pretends not to be. And the people who thrive are not the ones who deny it. They are the ones who sense it quietly, respect it early, and eventually reshape it from the inside. Knowing when to text back immediately vs later. You can feel the tension the second your phone lights up. A message comes in. You see the name. You read the text, and instantly a calculation starts running in your head that has nothing to do with the actual words on the screen. Do I reply now? Do I wait? What does replying fast signal? What does waiting signal? And why does a simple response suddenly feel like a social move? That tension exists for a reason. Here is the shock. Texting is no longer just communication. It is positioning. The timing of your response silently communicates interest, status, availability, and emotional control, whether you intend it to or not. And when you get that timing wrong, people react, even if they never say why. This rule is brutal because no one agrees on it out loud. There is no universal standard, yet everyone feels it when it is violated. Text back immediately to the wrong person and you seem overeager. Text back too late and you seem dismissive. The message content can be perfect and still land wrong because the timing sent a signal you did not mean to send. Humans are pattern detectors. We do not just read what you say. We track how you behave over time. Response speed becomes data. That data gets interpreted emotionally, not logically. If you reply instantly every time you are perceived as highly available, that can feel warm or it can quietly lower your perceived value depending on the relationship. If you reply inconsistently, people feel uncertainty. If you reply slowly to emotionally charged messages, people feel rejected, even if you were busy. The invisible rule is not about speed. It is about alignment. People expect your response timing to match the emotional weight of the relationship and the moment. When it does not, the brain registers mismatch. Mismatch creates discomfort. Discomfort gets attributed to you. This is why texting creates so much anxiety. It removes context, no tone, no body language. Timing becomes the loudest signal left. Psychologically, this ties into expectation management. Once someone forms an expectation for how quickly you respond, any deviation triggers interpretation. Not curiosity, interpretation. And interpretation is rarely generous. If you usually reply quickly, and suddenly do not, the other person assumes something changed. If you usually reply slowly, and suddenly reply instantly, they may read intensity or urgency that was not there. The punishment for getting this wrong is subtle. People mirror you. They pull back, they stop initiating, or they escalate emotionally, trying to reestablish balance. None of this is conscious. It is regulation. This rule hits hardest in early relationships and social gray areas, friends who might become more, colleagues who are not quite peers, new group dynamics. In these spaces, timing is information. Replying immediately can accidentally collapse distance too fast. Waiting too long can create distance you did not want. And once that emotional distance forms, it is hard to reverse. What makes this rule unfair is that it often punishes honesty. You might have your phone in your hand. You might genuinely want to reply. But doing so signals availability that the relationship has not yet earned. On the other hand, you might be genuinely busy, but silence reads as choice, not circumstance. This is why people start performing timing instead of communicating naturally. High social intelligence looks like consistency with intention. You are not fast or slow randomly. Your timing matches the relationship. Close friends get quicker responses because the bond supports it. Casual connections get slower, more measured replies because that maintains balance. Notice how people you respect text. They rarely feel rushed or distant. Their timing feels appropriate. That is not accidental. This rule also explains why people feel offended by read receipts, typing bubbles, and last seen indicators. These features remove ambiguity. They force timing into the spotlight. Once timing is visible, it becomes accountable, and accountability creates pressure. If you have ever felt like someone suddenly cooled off after you texted back too fast or too slow, this is likely why. You did not say the wrong thing. You signaled the wrong level of access. There is also a power dynamic. People with more social leverage can reply later without penalty. People with less are expected to be responsive. When someone ignores that imbalance, the group pushes back. This is especially punishing for people who are thoughtful. You want to give a good response, so you wait. The other person reads it as disinterest. Or you respond quickly because you care and get labeled intense. Either way, the interpretation overrides intent. The shift happens when you stop thinking in minutes and start thinking in meaning. What does this response time say in this relationship right now? Does it match the energy that already exists? Does it escalate or de-escalate appropriately? Once you understand this rule, texting becomes less stressful. You stop reacting impulsively. You stop overcorrecting. You choose timing the same way you choose tone. You also stop taking other people's timing personally. You recognize pattern, not insult. Knowing when to text back immediately versus later is not about playing games. It is about respecting emotional pacing. Every relationship has one, whether acknowledged or not, and in the invisible world of social rules, pacing matters. Too fast and you trip. Too slow and you fall behind. But when you move at the right speed, people feel comfortable, connected, and in sync with you without ever needing to explain why. Not oversharing personal struggles too early. It often starts with a sudden urge to be real. You are in a new space, new people, new energy. You feel a chance to connect, so instead of keeping things light, you open a door that leads straight into something heavy. A struggle, a past wound, something personal you usually keep guarded. You tell yourself this is honesty, this is depth, this is how real connection forms. And then something quietly goes wrong. No one reacts badly. They nod, they listen. They may even say supportive things. But the tone shifts. The interaction feels heavier. People seem unsure how to respond. And later you notice something subtle. They keep their distance. Not because they do not care, but because you moved too fast. Here is the shock. Oversharing early does not create closeness. It creates pressure. When you reveal personal struggles too soon, you are asking for emotional intimacy that has not been built yet. That request may be unspoken, but it is felt. The other person suddenly has a role they did not agree to take on. Supporter, confident, emotional anchor. Even if they want to be kind, the weight lands before trust exists to hold it. Humans are cautious about emotional responsibility. When it arrives too early, the nervous system reacts by pulling back. The invisible rule is that vulnerability has timing. Depth is not bad. It is powerful, but power without pacing overwhelms. When you share heavy personal struggles before a relationship has established safety, reciprocity, and context, people feel flooded. Psychologically, this ties into emotional load. Early interactions are meant to be low cost. They allow people to assess compatibility without commitment. Oversharing spikes the cost too quickly. The brain interprets that spike as risk. This is why people often say oversharing feels intense. Not because the content is wrong, but because the container is too small. Think about how it feels when someone you barely know tells you something deeply painful. You might feel compassion, but you also feel tension. You wonder what is expected of you. Do you respond? Do you comfort? Do you remember this later? The interaction suddenly demands more than it offered. That imbalance is what creates distance. What makes this rule especially painful is that oversharing often comes from good intentions. You want to be authentic. You want to skip small talk. You want to connect honestly. But socially, trust is built in layers, not leaps. Early vulnerability without established rapport can read as poor boundaries. Not emotionally open, but emotionally unsafe. The punishment is rarely direct. People do not tell you that you shared too much. They simply engage less. They keep things surface level. They stop inviting deeper conversations. They categorize you as someone who brings heaviness. This rule shows up constantly. On first dates where someone reveals unresolved trauma. In new workplaces where someone shares burnout or resentment too soon. In friendships where personal crises are introduced before shared experiences exist. Each time the listener feels pulled into intimacy without consent. There is also a status component. People who overshare early are often perceived as lacking emotional regulation. Even if that is not true, the perception sticks. Others worry they will be leaned on before they are ready. This does not mean you should hide your struggles or pretend to be fine. It means you should sequence them. High social intelligence looks like gradual disclosure. You reveal lighter truths first, preferences, values, small frustrations. You watch how the other person responds. You build trust through shared moments, not shared wounds. Then when heavier truths arrive, there is space for them. Notice how close relationships form. They rarely begin with trauma. They begin with mutual enjoyment, laughter, shared time, safety. Depth comes later. Oversharing too early also shifts the emotional center of gravity. The interaction becomes about you even if you did not intend it to. That can feel unbalanced. People want reciprocity, not obligation. If you have ever wondered why people seemed supportive in the moment but distant afterward, this may be why. They did not reject you. They protected themselves. This rule is especially punishing for people who are self-aware and reflective. You have language for your inner world. You are comfortable naming it. But comfort does not equal readiness in others. There is also a difference between vulnerability and processing. Processing belongs in spaces designed for it. Therapy, close friendships, long-standing relationships. Vulnerability in early stages should be lighter. Share feelings, not full histories. Experiences, not unresolved pain. Once you understand this rule, you start noticing how often it is broken and how quickly the social cost appears. People become cautious. Conversations shorten. Energy drops. The shift happens when you ask not is this true, but is this timely? That pause protects both you and the relationship. When you slow down disclosure, something surprising happens. People lean in more over time. They ask deeper questions. They invite more honesty because trust was allowed to form naturally. In the invisible world of social rules, vulnerability is not currency you spend to buy closeness. It is something you exchange once closeness already exists. And knowing when to hold back is not inauthentic. It is emotionally intelligent. Not oversharing personal struggles too early does not mean staying guarded forever. It means respecting the pace at which humans build safety. When you do that, your honesty lands where it belongs. Not as a burden, but as a bond. Acting busy enough to seem important, but not unavailable. There is a narrow, invisible line people walk every day without realizing it exists. On one side, you seem idle, too available, too easy to reach. On the other side, you seem distant, hard to access, uninterested, And somehow social value lives right in the middle. Miss it in either direction, and you pay for it. Most people only notice this rule after they break it. You reply instantly to everything. You always say yes. You are always free. And slowly people stop treating your time as valuable, or you do the opposite. You take forever to respond. You are always busy. You reschedule often, and people quietly stop trying. No confrontation, just disappearance. Here is the shock. Business is not about time. It is about signaling. Humans subconsciously equate scarcity with value. When something or someone is always available, it feels less important. When something is never available, it feels irrelevant. Social importance sits in the tension between access and demand. Acting busy enough tells people your life has motion, that others want your time, that you have priorities. Acting too busy tells people they are not one of them. This rule is brutal because it has nothing to do with reality. You can be genuinely busy and still signal warmth. You can have tons of free time and still signal value. What matters is how your availability feels to others. Psychologically, this ties into social economics. Attention is treated like currency. If you give it away freely, it depreciates. If you hoard it completely, people stop bidding. The goal is controlled availability. Think about people you perceive as important. They are not always reachable, but when they are present, they are present. Their responses feel intentional, not rushed or delayed out of avoidance. That balance creates respect. The invisible rule is that people want to feel chosen, not accommodated. If you always say yes immediately, it feels like convenience. If you say yes selectively, it feels like intention. This is why overscheduling yourself socially can backfire. You think you are being helpful, easygoing, flexible, but socially it reads as low leverage. People begin to assume your time has no competing value. On the other hand, acting constantly unavailable sends a different signal. It says, I am above this, or I do not need you. That triggers disengagement. Humans do not chase indefinitely without feedback. The punishment for missing this balance is subtle. If you are too available, people take you for granted. If you are too unavailable, people stop investing. In both cases, your perceived importance drops. This rule shows up everywhere. Workplaces where someone responds to emails instantly at all hours. They become expected to do so. Their boundaries vanish, or the opposite. Someone who takes days to respond and misses windows. They stop being looped in. It shows up in friendships. The person who always waits around versus the person who is always booked. The one becomes an afterthought. The other becomes a question mark. It shows up in dating. Over-responsiveness reads as neediness. Under-responsiveness reads as disinterest. Neither creates attraction. What makes this rule especially frustrating is that it changes with context. Your availability should match the relationship stage. Early on, a little delay creates intrigue. Later, too much delay creates distance. The calibration is dynamic. High social intelligence looks like pacing. You respond thoughtfully, not instantly. You are busy but not evasive. You sometimes say, I cannot right now, but offer an alternative. That communicates value and interest simultaneously. Notice how respected people manage this. They are not flaky. They are not clingy. They acknowledge requests even when they cannot fulfill them immediately. That acknowledgement preserves connection while maintaining boundaries. There is also a power element. People with more leverage can afford slower responses. People with less are expected to be quicker. When someone with low leverage acts unavailable, it feels off. When someone with high leverage acts too available, it feels incongruent. The group adjusts their expectations accordingly. This is why copying someone else's response habits rarely works. Their social position is not yours. The same behavior sends different signals depending on context. If you have ever felt confused about why being helpful made you less respected or why being distant made you less included, this is why. You were signaling the wrong level of demand for your time. The shift happens when you stop thinking in terms of busy or free and start thinking in terms of signal. What does this response pattern communicate about my priorities and interest? Does it make my time feel intentional? You can be warm without being instantly available. You can be busy without being cold. That balance is the skill. Once you learn this rule, you start seeing it everywhere. Who gets chased? Who gets overlooked? Who people wait for? Who they stop inviting? And you realize importance is often less about talent or personality and more about how access is managed. Acting busy enough to seem important, but not unavailable, is not manipulation. It is social calibration. You are teaching people how to treat your time. And in the invisible world of social rules, how people treat your time becomes how they treat you. Reading when help is wanted versus when it's intrusive. There is a delicate moment almost everyone misses. Someone is struggling. Maybe with a task, maybe with a decision, maybe just emotionally. You notice. Your instinct is to step in, offer advice, fix it, be helpful. You mean well. You are being generous. And yet, somehow, the very act of offering help can make things worse. Here is the shock. Help is not always welcome, and giving it at the wrong time can feel intrusive even if your intentions are perfect. Humans are wired to balance autonomy and connection. When someone is in the middle of a problem, they may want support, but they also want to maintain control. Offering assistance too early signals to their brain, "You do not trust me to handle this," even subtly. That perception triggers defensiveness. Suddenly your help is interpreted as judgment, not generosity. The invisible rule is simple, but brutally hard to follow. You are expected to sense when guidance is wanted, and when it is not. Too much, too soon, and you become overbearing. Too little, too late, and you seem indifferent. Either mistake can be punished socially. This is why intentions matter less than timing. Imagine a coworker struggling with a spreadsheet formula. You immediately show them the solution. On the surface, you are helpful, but they might have wanted to figure it out themselves. Your input unintentionally removes their sense of competence. Later, they may avoid asking for your help, not because they dislike you, but because your help feels like criticism by proxy. Psychologically, this is tied to agency. People feel safe when they can control how much help they receive. Intervening too soon takes that control away. Autonomy and respect are intertwined, and when violated, subtle social distance forms. It is also why people hesitate to ask for help themselves. If someone has a reputation for stepping in without invitation, others will keep problems to themselves, fearing judgment. Your helpfulness becomes a liability. High social intelligence is about calibration. You read cues, body language, tone, hesitation, frustration. Sometimes a simple pause is enough. If they are flustered but still engaged, maybe they want guidance. If they are defensive, distracted, or subtly avoiding eye contact, you hold back. There is also a framing skill. People rarely resist help when it is optional. Framing it as a choice, "Would it help if I? Do you want me to?" signals respect for their autonomy. It transforms your intervention from intrusion into invitation. The invisible punishment for misreading this rule is subtle but lasting. People stop sharing challenges with you. They hide struggles. They perceive you as controlling, even when you are just attentive. Your social capital decreases quietly, not with confrontation, but with distance. This rule shows up everywhere: work meetings, group projects, friendships, even family interactions. Someone hesitates with a difficult topic, and the difference between reading the moment correctly or barging in determines whether trust deepens or erodes. It is also emotionally costly. Misreading the line leaves you frustrated, wondering why your kindness backfired. You may even start withholding help preemptively, fearing the same outcome repeatedly. That caution itself can reduce your social impact. The shift happens when you start treating help as a dialogue rather than a gift or duty. Listen first. Assess engagement, mood, and willingness. Offer softly. Step back if you sense resistance. Sometimes the most valuable help is patience rather than action. Once you internalize this, you notice patterns everywhere. Who asks for help comfortably, and who struggles privately? Who relaxes when offered input, and who stiffens? You start seeing help not as an automatic reaction, but as a strategic interaction with emotional nuance. Because in the invisible world of social rules, assistance is not a pure good. Its value is determined by timing, perception, and autonomy. Knowing when to step in and when to step back is one of the quietest and most powerful skills in maintaining trust, respect, and connection. It is not about being passive. It is about being present, observant, responsive. And once you master that, your help becomes something people welcome, not something they brace for. Not outshining others in group settings. You know that moment in a group when someone shares an idea, and you immediately have something bigger, brighter, or more impressive to add. Maybe you have a faster solution, a clever joke, or a story that upstages everyone else. You lean in, share it, and for a brief second it feels satisfying. You nailed it. You're the smartest one in the room. And then, something shifts. Not drastically, not loudly, but subtly. People stop making eye contact as easily. The energy changes. Later, you notice fewer invitations to brainstorm or casual hangouts. That burst of brilliance just cost you more than you realized. Here's the shock most people never see coming. Outshining others is rarely punished overtly, but socially it can be one of the fastest ways to isolate yourself. Humans operate on unspoken hierarchies and social reciprocity. We are wired to reward collaboration, not solo dominance, in group settings. When someone draws too much attention to themselves, the brain of the group interprets it as a threat to cohesion. Even if your idea is perfect, even if it is helpful, the emotional weight is what matters. Outshining signals, consciously or unconsciously, that you value your own recognition more than the group's harmony. That tiny shift triggers subtle defenses in everyone else. They don't confront you. They pull back. They stop volunteering ideas freely. They stop signaling inclusion. You just became that person, without a single word spoken about it. The invisible rule is deceptively simple: shine collectively, not individually. Let others have space to contribute. Build on ideas instead of eclipsing them. Timing, phrasing, and humility are everything. Psychologically, this connects to social comparison and status regulation. In groups, people monitor each other's relative competence. Too much perceived superiority can make others feel unsafe or undervalued. Humans prefer balance, a mix of leadership, insight, and restraint. If someone consistently disrupts that balance, the group responds by creating distance, not confrontation. This is why people who dominate conversations or always share the flashiest ideas are often respected but not liked. Influence comes with caution. The group admires skill, but secretly guards its own sense of safety. Contrast that with someone who elevates others subtly. They recognize contributions, ask clarifying questions, or highlight someone else's insight first. They shine, but strategically. They gain trust without triggering defensiveness. The spotlight feels shared, even if they are the brightest one in the room. That is the social skill almost nobody is explicitly taught. The punishment for violating this rule is never direct. People do not call you out for being impressive. They stop collaborating as freely. Invitations to join projects, conversations, or social gatherings start tapering off. Your ideas might still be acknowledged, but your presence becomes a little more managed. Outshining also backfires in emotional tone. When people feel overshadowed, even subtly, they can develop resentment. It doesn't matter if your intent was harmless or helpful. Social perception often outweighs personal intention. High social intelligence is about calibration. You recognize the room's rhythm. You notice who needs space to be heard. You amplify group contributions while reserving your standout moments for situations where the spotlight is naturally yours. It is less about hiding brilliance and more about strategic generosity. If you have ever wondered why someone less talented seems more socially successful, this is often why. They are not necessarily smarter or better, they are socially fluent. They know when to step forward and when to support. They know how to be seen without triggering subtle social defense mechanisms. The rule is especially punishing for confident, capable people. They assume competence will earn them respect. And it does, just not automatically for social bonding. Too much visibility too soon, and people perceive it as self-interest rather than collaboration. The shift happens when you stop asking how impressive you can be and start asking how your contributions affect the group's comfort and cohesion. That awareness transforms interactions. You can still add value, but it lands in a way people welcome rather than defend against. Because in the invisible world of social rules, being exceptional is not the same as being socially effective. People remember those who make them feel capable, safe, and included, not just those who outshine everyone in the room. Mastering when to step forward and when to hold back is one of the quietest, most powerful forms of social intelligence there is. Knowing when eye contact becomes uncomfortable. You know the moment without thinking about it. You look someone in the eyes during a conversation, and for a beat, everything feels connected. You feel presence, attention, understanding, and then the seconds stretch a little too long. The warmth fades. Something shifts. The person blinks more, looks away, shifts their body, and suddenly you realize you've crossed a line. Here's the shock. Eye contact is one of the most basic, universal tools for connection, but it has a hidden social thermostat. Too little and you seem disinterested, untrustworthy, or shy. Too much and you trigger discomfort, intimidation, or even aggression. The difference is often a fraction of a second. Humans are wired to read the eyes as emotional signals. They communicate attention, intention, and emotional state faster than words ever could. When eye contact is prolonged beyond the group's unspoken comfort zone, it feels like overreach. You are no longer connecting. You are dominating, probing, or challenging. Even if your intentions are harmless, the other person's nervous system responds as if they are being evaluated. The invisible rule is deceptively simple: maintain engagement without forcing scrutiny. Too little and you lose trust. Too much and you create tension. Most people are punished socially for violating this rule, not with words but with subtle distance. A shift in posture, shorter responses, or less willingness to share follows. What makes this especially brutal is that context matters. Cultural norms, personal history, power dynamics, and social familiarity all shift the threshold. In one setting, steady eye contact signals confidence. In another, it signals threat. In small groups, peers notice deviations immediately, even if they cannot articulate it. Psychologically, prolonged eye contact triggers primal mechanisms. Humans evolved to use gaze for threat detection. Staring signals dominance, confrontation, or danger in nonverbal communication. That is why someone can feel attacked by your gaze, even if your tone is friendly. The punishment is built into their biology, not your behavior. High social intelligence lies in calibration. You watch micro cues, the frequency of blinking, subtle head tilts, body orientation, breathing patterns. You modulate engagement naturally, leaning in to show attentiveness and softening gaze to signal comfort. It looks effortless, but it is finely tuned. Think about skilled communicators or leaders. They maintain just enough eye contact to hold attention, signal confidence, and build connection, but never long enough to trigger discomfort. They punctuate it with brief breaks, glances away, or shifting focus, making their presence engaging without oppressive. The punishment for missing this rule is rarely explicit. You might feel the shift without understanding why. Less information shared with you, more guarded body language, or an emotional pullback from the group. Over time, repeated violations make others see you as intense, intimidating, or hard to read. There is also an emotional nuance. People who are anxious or socially inexperienced often overshoot. They try to signal interest by staring too intently, thinking more attention equals more connection. The irony is the opposite. Connection diminishes because others' nervous systems interpret the intensity as intrusion. Conversely, maintaining eye contact signals disengagement or dishonesty. People feel you are hiding something or uninterested. So the key is not avoidance nor overexposure. It's balance. The shift happens when you start asking not how long should I look, but how does this feel? Watch the other person. Let their micro reactions guide the rhythm. Eye contact is a dialogue, not a monologue. It moves. It breathes. It signals engagement without forcing it. Once you grasp this rule, you notice it everywhere. Meetings where one person's gaze feels magnetic or oppressive. Conversations where attention feels warm and safe versus uncomfortable and heavy. It suddenly explains dynamics that felt inexplicable before. Because in the invisible world of social rules, eyes are both a bridge and a boundary. Knowing when eye contact becomes uncomfortable is less about rules and more about reading signals, adjusting subtly, and protecting shared comfort. Master that, and your presence becomes magnetic without ever feeling threatening. Leaving conversations without making it awkward. There's a moment in every conversation when you know it's time to leave. Maybe the topic has run its course, maybe energy is fading, or maybe you have somewhere to be. You could linger, stretching the last words, or you could slip away. And how you choose often determines whether people feel connection or tension afterward. Here's the shock. Leaving a conversation is socially risky. Even the simplest exit can feel like rejection if it's done carelessly. People are not consciously judging. They don't say anything, but their posture changes. Their tone shifts. They stop offering space. And suddenly, your departure has left a ripple you didn't intend. The invisible rule is deceptively simple. Exit gracefully without making your absence a statement. Most people either oversell the exit, apologizing too much, over-explaining or announcing it loudly, or undersell it, fading awkwardly and leaving the other person hanging. Both break the subtle social rhythm. Humans are wired to detect relational balance. When someone leaves abruptly or with too much fanfare, it triggers a subtle alert, a disruption in connection. The brain reads it as emotional uncertainty. You might be leaving politely, but the group feels the tension. What makes this rule especially punishing is that it's invisible. No one will tell you. There's no handbook. You only notice when someone's body language changes or invitations dwindle after repeated missteps. The punishment is social distance, not confrontation. Psychologically, this is about signaling. When you leave well, you communicate, "I value this interaction, I am aware of your time, and I am leaving for reasons that are neutral or positive." When you leave poorly, you communicate, "I am impatient, I am distracted, or this interaction is inconvenient." Even subtle cues, like not making eye contact, trailing off, or abrupt movement, send those messages. High social intelligence is about preparation and timing. The exit should be natural, tied to context, and signal acknowledgement. You might offer a short summary of appreciation. "It was great talking with you. I'll catch up later," or use a natural transition. "I don't want to monopolize your time. Let's continue this another time." The key is brevity and warmth without over-explaining. Notice how skilled conversationalists leave spaces open. They don't just vanish, they close the loop in a way that leaves the other person feeling respected rather than abandoned. That might mean a quick compliment, a plan for follow-up, or a smooth shift toward a natural pause. The rule also has a timing element. Leaving too early can feel dismissive. Leaving too late drags the energy. Mastering this requires reading the flow. When people start to trail off, laugh less, or shift body posture, it signals readiness to transition. The punishment for ignoring this rule is subtle but cumulative. People may stop initiating long conversations with you. Invitations to social gatherings may dwindle. You may find yourself on the periphery even though your intention was never rude. This is especially punishing for people who value honesty or directness. You want to leave without pretense, thinking the truth alone is sufficient. But social rhythm is not truth. It's shared emotional awareness. Leaving gracefully communicates that awareness. Once you understand this rule, exits stop feeling stressful. You stop agonizing over the right words or worrying about awkwardness. You learn to leave lightly, with minimal disruption, preserving both your time and the other person's comfort. Because in the invisible world of social rules, departures are just as important as entries. Leaving conversations without making it awkward is not manipulation. It's a social skill that keeps relationships smooth, energy intact, and connections intact, even when you are no longer physically present. Agreeing just enough to avoid conflict. There's a strange skill almost everyone practices without realizing it. You're in a conversation, maybe a meeting, maybe a family dinner, maybe a casual group chat. Someone expresses an opinion that rubs you the wrong way. Maybe it's wrong, maybe it's annoying, maybe it's something you would argue with fiercely in private. But in this moment, you don't. You nod. You murmur yes. You smile. You let it slide. Here's the shock. That tiny act of agreeing just enough is not laziness or weakness. It's a finely tuned social strategy. Humans are wired to avoid direct conflict in shared spaces because conflict costs more than disagreement. It costs trust, energy, and comfort. Even a small argument triggers defensive reactions, subtle withdrawal, and long-term friction. The invisible rule is this: you are expected to regulate your agreement to maintain harmony, even if internally you disagree. Saying yes enough to keep the peace signals respect for the group's emotional rhythm without surrendering your actual position entirely. Cross that line, argue too much or too little, and the social balance shifts against you. What makes this rule brutal is that it punishes honesty in the moment. You might know the facts, you might want to correct someone, and intellectually, you are right. But socially, that correctness can feel like an attack. Even small corrections can trigger the other person's defensiveness, make bystanders uncomfortable, or subtly mark you as difficult. Psychologically, humans are hardwired to protect face, both theirs and yours. When someone aggressively disagrees or refuses to align with group sentiment, it threatens that equilibrium. Even subtle acts of disagreement register as potential disruption. Your nod, your partial agreement, your strategic acknowledgement, it's the social lubricant that keeps interactions smooth. Think about meetings at work. Someone presents an idea that is not fully accurate. You could correct them, or you could acknowledge the parts that work, ask a clarifying question, and let the rest slide for now. The difference is not intellectual. It is relational. People will perceive you as supportive rather than combative. The punishment for violating this rule is subtle but real. People may start avoiding your input. They may not invite you to informal brainstorming sessions. They may frame you as rigid or argumentative, even if your intentions were constructive. Social costs accumulate silently. High social intelligence is about calibrating agreement. You are not lying. You are not being passive. You are choosing which battles to fight and which to let pass. Sometimes that means nodding. Sometimes it means framing your disagreement gently. Sometimes it means waiting for the right moment to offer your perspective. Notice skilled communicators. They rarely respond with blunt contradiction in groups. Instead, they use phrasing like, "That makes sense, and I wonder if," or "I see that perspective." Another way to consider it might be, they preserve group cohesion while subtly introducing nuance. That is the invisible craft of agreeing just enough. This rule also explains why some people are liked despite having strong opinions. They know when to assert, when to align, and when to let things slide. They maintain credibility without triggering defensiveness. Others who always correct, always push, or always challenge, even subtly, quickly earn reputations as difficult, which isolates them socially. The subtle beauty of this skill is that it protects relationships while allowing you to retain integrity. You are not abandoning your position, you are managing timing, perception, and emotional flow. You create space for eventual discussion when it will be heard rather than resisted. If you have ever wondered why some people are more persuasive, it is often because they mastered the art of partial agreement first. By not forcing confrontation, they keep doors open. They get to influence later rather than alienate immediately. Once you internalize this rule, disagreement stops feeling like a threat to your values. You learn to see conflict as a spectrum and social agreement as a tool for timing, not surrender. Because in the invisible world of social rules, surviving a conversation is not about always being right. It's about being right in a way that others can hear. Agreeing just enough to avoid conflict is not compromise. It is strategic harmony, and it quietly preserves both relationships and influence. Not asking follow-up questions that expose insecurity. You know the moment without thinking. Someone makes a statement. Maybe it's about their experience, an opinion, or a personal accomplishment. You want to know more. You want to dig in, ask for clarity, maybe even challenge gently. So you start with a follow-up question, and then you notice something subtle. Their body stiffens. Their tone shifts. The energy changes. Suddenly, your curiosity feels like an attack. Here's the shock. Follow-up questions are not neutral. Even the simplest one can expose insecurity. Humans are wired to protect self-image in social settings. When someone probes too far into areas of vulnerability, even unintentionally, they trigger defensive responses. Your question might seem innocuous to you, but socially it reads as scrutiny. The invisible rule is deceptively simple: ask questions that encourage without exposing. Social intelligence is measured not by how much you know, but by how safely your curiosity lands. Too much probing too early, and the group senses discomfort. Too little, and you seem disengaged. The balance is microscopic. Psychologically, this is tied to self-presentation. Everyone maintains a mental model of how they want to be perceived. Follow-up questions that brush against gaps in confidence, ability, or knowledge can make someone feel small, even if your intent was simply to understand. That discomfort is registered instantly, often non-verbally, and it shapes future interactions. Think about a coworker sharing a process. You ask for details that highlight mistakes or gaps. Technically, you are seeking clarity. Socially, you are putting them in a position to explain or justify themselves. Even subtle misalignments create tension. They may nod politely, but their engagement decreases afterward. Invitations to collaborate subtly decline. You just triggered a social consequence without realizing it. The punishment is almost always invisible. People don't call you out. They adjust behavior quietly. They pull back. They protect themselves. And over time, repeated missteps mark you as someone who makes others uncomfortable without intending harm. High social intelligence is about calibration and phrasing. Instead of questions that reveal insecurity, you focus on reflection, encouragement, or neutral curiosity. For example, instead of asking, "How did you not notice this earlier?" you ask, "How did you approach this?" The content is similar, but the perception is radically different. One exposes weakness, the other invites sharing. Notice skilled conversationalists. They listen deeply but frame follow-ups to preserve dignity. They ask questions that show engagement, not evaluation. That subtle difference maintains trust and encourages openness. People relax around them because curiosity feels safe, not threatening. This rule is especially punishing for naturally curious people. You want to understand. You want depth. But depth without empathy can come across as interrogation. You might leave a room intellectually satisfied and emotionally disconnected. Social cost accumulates quietly. The shift happens when you start asking not "what do I want to know," but "what can the other person comfortably share?" You learn to sense the limits of safety and operate within them. Curiosity becomes a tool for connection, not exposure. Once you master this rule, conversations transform. People open up more willingly. They offer insights without hesitation. You become someone whose questions feel like invitations, not assessments. Because in the invisible world of social rules, the line between engagement and threat is razor thin. Not asking follow-up questions that expose insecurity is not about avoiding curiosity. It's about wielding it wisely. Social harmony depends not just on what you know or ask, but on how your questions make others feel safe enough to answer honestly. Pretending not to notice social mistakes. There is a moment that happens in almost every social setting. Someone misspeaks. Someone tells a joke that does not land. Someone trips over their words, overshares, interrupts, or says something slightly off. Everyone notices it at the same time. And then something very specific happens. Nobody acknowledges it. Here's the shock. Pretending not to notice social mistakes is not politeness. It is a survival instinct baked into group dynamics. The moment you acknowledge another person's social slip, even subtly, you turn discomfort into exposure. And exposure is what people fear more than being wrong. The invisible rule is simple but unforgiving. You are expected to protect the group's emotional surface at all costs. When someone makes a mistake, the socially intelligent response is not to correct, clarify, joke about it, or even reassure too loudly. It is to act as if nothing happened. Smooth it over by ignoring it completely. Why? Because humans are constantly monitoring how they are perceived. A social mistake already triggers internal alarm bells. Heart rate increases. Self-awareness spikes. The person is already embarrassed before anyone reacts. When you point it out, even kindly, you amplify that embarrassment. The nervous system interprets it as social danger. Psychologically, this is tied to face preservation. People need to feel that their public image is intact. When others pretend not to notice, it gives them an escape hatch. They can mentally rewind, recover, and rejoin the group without being marked. That unspoken forgiveness is one of the strongest social bonds there is. But most people fail this rule without realizing it. They laugh a second too long. They say something like, "Oh no, that's awkward." Or, "I know what you meant." Or, "Don't worry about it." They think they are helping. Socially, they are spotlighting the mistake. And the group feels it. The punishment for violating this rule is subtle but real. People become more guarded around you. They stop taking conversational risks. They edit themselves more carefully. You may be seen as perceptive or honest, but not safe. And safety is what makes people comfortable enough to connect. This rule shows up everywhere. At work, when someone fumbles a presentation. In friendships, when someone tells an embarrassing story. In group conversations, when a joke falls flat. The person who pretends nothing happened instantly becomes a social anchor. The person who reacts, corrects, or highlights becomes a source of tension. What makes this especially hard is that intelligence works against you here. You notice patterns. You catch inconsistencies. You are aware of social missteps. But social intelligence is not about noticing. It is about deciding what not to acknowledge. High social fluency looks like selective blindness. You redirect attention. You continue the conversation as if the slip never occurred. You give the other person time to recover their footing. That restraint communicates empathy without a single word. There is also a hierarchy element. People with more power can sometimes get away with pointing out mistakes. But even then, it costs warmth and trust. People with less power are punished more severely for calling attention to errors. The group reads it as disruption, not honesty. The most interesting part is that this rule creates loyalty. When you protect someone's dignity without them asking, they remember it emotionally. They may not consciously recall the moment, but they feel safer around you. They open up more. They relax. You become someone they want nearby in social situations. This is why humor is dangerous here. Joking about a mistake can feel like relief, but it still locks attention onto the error. The laugh becomes a confirmation that something went wrong. Silence, continuation, or redirection is often the kinder move. The shift happens when you realize that most social mistakes are not meant to be processed publicly. They are meant to evaporate. The group moves forward, and the mistake dissolves as if it never existed. That is the unwritten agreement. Once you internalize this, you start noticing who makes spaces feel safe. It is almost always the people who let moments pass without comment. They do not flinch. They do not react. They do not try to fix. They just keep the rhythm going. Because in the invisible world of social rules, grace is often invisible. Pretending not to notice social mistakes is not dishonesty. It is a form of emotional protection. And the people who master it quietly become the ones others trust most, because they understand a powerful truth: dignity matters more than correctness, and comfort matters more than being right. Knowing when compliments cross into discomfort. There is a moment when a compliment stops feeling good. It happens fast and quietly. 1 second, the other person feels seen. The next, something tightens. Their smile stiffens. Their posture shifts. And even though you said something positive, the energy changes in a way you did not expect. Here's the shock. Compliments are not automatically safe. In fact, they are one of the fastest ways to make someone uncomfortable if you misread the context. What was meant to uplift can easily feel invasive, evaluative, or loaded. And when that line is crossed, people rarely tell you. They just remember how you made them feel. The invisible rule is this: compliments are only welcome when they preserve the other person's sense of control. The second a compliment feels like it puts someone under a spotlight they did not ask for, it stops being flattering and starts feeling like pressure. Humans are deeply sensitive to being evaluated. Even praise activates the same part of the brain as judgment when it feels too personal, too intense, or too specific. The nervous system does not always distinguish between positive and negative attention. It only asks one question: am I safe right now? That is why compliments about appearance, intelligence, or talent can backfire so easily. You might think you are being kind, but the other person may hear expectation, comparison, obligation, or worse, a silent demand to maintain that standard. Suddenly, your compliment feels like a burden they did not consent to carry. The punishment for crossing this line is subtle but lasting. People become guarded. They deflect praise. They shorten interactions. They may even avoid you. Not because you were rude, but because you made them self-conscious. And self-consciousness is socially exhausting. This rule becomes even sharper when power dynamics are involved. Compliments from someone with higher status carry more weight. A remark that feels casual to you can feel scrutinizing to them. What lands as friendly acknowledgement in your mind may land as evaluation in theirs. Psychologically, this ties into identity threat. When you compliment something central to a person's identity, you activate fear of loss. If you say someone is always so confident, they now feel pressure to perform confidence around you. If you praise their intelligence, they may fear making a mistake. The compliment creates a silent contract they never agreed to sign. High social intelligence is about where and how you aim the praise. Compliments that focus on choices, effort, or moment-specific actions feel safer than those that define someone. Saying that was a thoughtful point lands better than you are so smart. One acknowledges behavior. The other assigns an identity. Notice people who are universally liked. Their compliments are light, precise, and situational. They do not linger. They do not demand a response. They offer appreciation and move on, giving the other person room to accept or deflect without pressure. Most people make the mistake of over-explaining compliments. They pile on details to prove sincerity. Ironically, that intensity is what creates discomfort. The longer you dwell, the more it feels like scrutiny rather than kindness. This rule is especially punishing for sincere people. You feel something positive and want to express it fully. But social comfort is not about fullness. It is about dosage. Too much warmth too fast can feel invasive, even if it comes from a good place. There is also timing. Compliments in private land differently than in groups. Public praise can feel exposing. Even positive attention in front of others can trigger embarrassment or pressure. What feels supportive to you might feel like being put on display to them. The shift happens when you start asking one silent question before speaking. Does this compliment give them freedom or take it away? Freedom to respond lightly. Freedom to move on. Freedom to not live up to it again. Once you understand this, compliments become more powerful because they are safer. People relax instead of bracing. They smile naturally instead of managing a reaction. They remember the feeling, not the words. Because in the invisible world of social rules, kindness is not measured by intention alone. It is measured by how much ease it creates. Knowing when compliments cross into discomfort is not about saying less nice things. It is about saying them in a way that leaves the other person lighter, not watched. And the people who master that become the ones whose presence feels affirming rather than overwhelming. Understanding when silence is expected, not rude. There is a moment in conversations where words actually make things worse. You feel it rising. A pause opens up. No one is speaking, and something in you panics. You rush to fill it. You crack a joke. You explain more. You add context that no one asked for, and afterward you can feel it. You should not have said anything. Here's the shock. Silence is not a social failure. In many situations, it is the expected response. And breaking it too quickly is what makes things awkward, not the pause itself. Most people are taught, implicitly, that silence equals discomfort, that if no one is talking, something is wrong. So we learn to treat quiet moments like emergencies. Fill the space. Smooth it over. Keep things moving. But socially fluent people know something most others do not. Silence often carries meaning, and interrupting it can signal insecurity, disrespect, or emotional tone deafness. The invisible rule is this: not every pause is an invitation to speak. Sometimes silence is the appropriate signal of respect, processing, or emotional awareness. When you ignore that and rush in with words, you break the emotional contract of the moment. Psychologically, silence gives the nervous system time to regulate. After emotionally loaded statements, difficult topics, or moments of reflection, the brain needs space. Speaking too soon can feel like dismissal. Even neutral words can land as pressure to move on before the moment has been fully absorbed. Think about someone sharing something vulnerable. They finish speaking and stop. That pause is not empty. It is loaded. If you jump in immediately with advice, reassurance, or a story of your own, you may unintentionally signal that their feelings are uncomfortable or inconvenient. Silence, in that moment, is not neglect. It is presence. The punishment for missing this rule is subtle but consistent. People stop sharing deeper thoughts with you. Conversations stay surface level. You may be seen as friendly but emotionally unsafe. Not because you said something wrong, but because you did not allow space when it mattered. Silence is also expected in group settings more than people realize. After a strong point is made, after a joke lands, after tension enters the room, the pause allows the group to recalibrate. Someone who rushes to speak during these moments often feels out of sync, even if their words are fine. High social intelligence means reading the emotional weight of the room. Silence after humor is different from silence after conflict. Silence in a meeting is different from silence between friends. The skilled move is not to eliminate silence, but to honor it when it carries meaning. There is also a power dynamic here. People with higher status often speak less, not more. They allow silence to do the work. People with less perceived status feel pressure to fill space to prove value. Ironically, that urge often backfires, making them seem anxious or intrusive rather than engaged. The human brain interprets silence differently based on context. In moments of seriousness, silence signals respect. In moments of reflection, it signals thoughtfulness. In moments of tension, it signals restraint. Breaking those silences too early can feel like emotional impatience. This rule is especially punishing for people who are empathetic and expressive. You want to help. You want to respond. You want to show care. But care is not always verbal. Sometimes the most validating response is simply staying quiet long enough for the other person to feel heard. Notice people who are calming to be around. They are not constantly talking. They do not rush to fill every pause. They allow conversations to breathe. Their silence feels intentional, not awkward. That is not accidental. It is emotional timing. There is also the opposite mistake. Withholding words when reassurance or acknowledgement is needed can feel cold. The difference lies in reading cues. If someone looks to you expectantly, silence may feel like abandonment. If they look inward, silence may feel like support. The skill is sensing which one the moment calls for. The shift happens when you stop asking, "How do I avoid awkwardness?" and start asking, "What does this moment need?" Sometimes the answer is words. Sometimes it is quiet. When you learn to trust silence, you stop fearing it, and others start feeling safer around you. Once you internalize this rule, conversations deepen. People slow down around you. They open up more. They do not feel rushed or managed. Your presence becomes grounding rather than noisy. Because in the invisible world of social rules, silence is not absence. It is communication. Understanding when silence is expected, not rude, is about emotional literacy. And the people who master it are rarely the loudest in the room. But they are often the ones everyone listens to when they finally speak. Not asking about money, even casually. There is a question that feels harmless when it first crosses your mind. How much do you make? How much did that cost? Are you doing well financially? It can sound curious, practical, even friendly. But the moment it leaves your mouth, something shifts. The other person hesitates. Their tone tightens. The conversation never quite recovers. Here's the shock. Money is one of the most emotionally loaded topics in social life, and asking about it casually is almost always perceived as invasive, even when no offense was intended. What feels like curiosity to you often feels like exposure to them. The invisible rule is this: money is treated as private identity information, not neutral data. When you ask about it directly, you are not just asking about numbers. You are asking someone to reveal their status, security, success, or failure. And most people are not prepared to do that on demand. Psychologically, money is tightly linked to self-worth and social comparison. The brain immediately starts calculating. Am I doing better than you? Worse than you? Will this change how you see me? That internal spiral happens in seconds. Even if you promise no judgment, the nervous system does not trust that promise. This is why even light questions like, "Was that expensive?" or "Are you comfortable financially?" can trigger discomfort. The question forces someone to position themselves on an invisible ladder, and once that ladder is activated, the interaction becomes unsafe. The punishment for breaking this rule is subtle but real. People become guarded. They deflect with jokes. They change the subject. Over time, they may share less with you in general. Not because you were rude, but because you crossed into territory that feels evaluative. What makes this rule especially confusing is that money is talked about constantly in abstract ways. We discuss prices, markets, careers, and lifestyles openly. But the moment it becomes personal, the rules change. Abstract money talk is safe. Personal money talk is intimate. Confusing the two is where people get socially burned. There is also a power dynamic at play. Asking someone with less perceived status about money can feel like pressure or comparison. Asking someone with more perceived status can feel like prying or envy. Either way, the question carries weight beyond your intent. High social intelligence is about understanding what people volunteer versus what they protect. Most people will share financial details only when they feel deep trust or when the context demands it. When you ask casually, you remove their choice. That loss of control is what creates discomfort. Think about how people react when money comes up unexpectedly. Short answers, humor, vague responses. Those are defense mechanisms. The brain is buying time, trying to preserve dignity without revealing too much. This rule also explains why people often feel shame or anxiety afterward, even if they answered. They replay the moment, wondering how they were perceived. The question lingers longer than the conversation. Socially fluent people rarely ask about money directly. Instead, they let information surface naturally. They listen for what others choose to share. They understand that financial transparency is earned, not requested. When money does need to be discussed, context matters. Practical necessity changes the rules. Negotiations, shared expenses, or planning situations create permission. Outside of those contexts, curiosity is usually misread as comparison. This rule is especially punishing for people who value openness and honesty. You might think removing taboo creates connection, but socially, taboos exist to protect emotional safety. Ignoring them does not make you progressive. It makes others uneasy. The shift happens when you realize that respect is often about restraint. You do not need every answer. You do not need to know where someone stands financially to connect with them. Letting that boundary exist signals maturity and awareness. Once you internalize this, conversations become smoother. People relax around you. They do not brace for personal evaluation. They feel safe sharing what they choose when they choose. Because in the invisible world of social rules, money is never just money. It is status, fear, pride, security, and vulnerability wrapped into one. Not asking about it, even casually, is not avoidance. It is emotional intelligence, and the people who understand that are the ones others trust, without ever needing to explain why. Adjusting humor based on who's listening. There is a joke you think is harmless. You have told it before. It landed. People laughed. So you tell it again, in a different room, around different people, same words, same timing. And instead of laughter, you get silence. Or worse, tight smiles. Someone shifts in their chair. Someone looks away. The air goes flat. Here's the shock. Humor is not universal, and using the wrong kind of humor in the wrong audience is one of the fastest ways to lose social safety without realizing it. What feels funny to you can feel uncomfortable, alienating, or even threatening to someone else depending on who is listening. The invisible rule is this: humor must be adjusted to the emotional, cultural, and power dynamics of the room. Telling the same joke everywhere is not confidence. Socially, it is tone deafness, and people punish tone deafness quietly. Humor is not just about being funny. It is about signaling alignment. When you joke, you are implicitly saying, "This is how I see the world. Do you see it the same way?" If the answer is no, people do not argue, they retreat. Psychologically, humor activates group belonging mechanisms. Laughter is a social bond, but when humor misses, it triggers the opposite response. The brain reads it as a mismatch. Are you one of us? Do you get us? That split second of uncertainty changes how people treat you going forward. This is why the same joke can be charming among friends and inappropriate at work, or hilarious in private but uncomfortable in mixed company. The content might be identical, but the social meaning is not. Context decides whether humor connects or isolates. The punishment for missing this rule is subtle but lasting. People may label you as awkward, insensitive, or risky to be around. Not out loud, internally. And once that label forms, others become more guarded around you. Conversations stay shallow. Invitations become selective. What makes this rule especially dangerous is that humor feels personal. If a joke fails, it feels like rejection of you, not just the joke. That emotional sting often pushes people to double down, making things worse. Or it makes them withdraw entirely. High social intelligence is not about suppressing humor. It is about reading the room before deploying it. You notice age differences, cultural backgrounds, power hierarchies, emotional tone, and current stress levels. You calibrate without consciously thinking about it. Notice people who are consistently well-liked. Their humor changes subtly from group to group. They are not less authentic. They are more aware. They know that humor is a tool for connection, not self-expression at all costs. There is also a power component. Humor that punches down creates discomfort. Humor that punches up can create tension. Humor that relies on shared assumptions can exclude people who do not share them. The safest humor builds bridges instead of drawing lines. This is why self-directed humor often lands better in unfamiliar groups. It lowers threat. It signals humility. But even that has limits. Too much self-deprecation can feel like fishing for reassurance or emotional labor. Again, calibration matters. The brain processes humor faster than logic. People feel before they think. If your joke triggers discomfort, they will not analyze why. They will just remember the feeling. And feelings are sticky. This rule is especially punishing for people who use humor as a coping mechanism or identity. You are used to connecting through jokes. When that tool misfires, it feels like losing your voice. But social fluency requires more than one mode of connection. The shift happens when you stop asking, "Is this funny?" and start asking, "Is this safe here?" Safe does not mean boring. It means inclusive. It means attuned. It means leaving people feeling relaxed, not evaluated or excluded. Once you internalize this rule, humor becomes more effective, not less. Your jokes land more often because they are tailored. People trust you more because they sense awareness. Laughter feels shared instead of risky. You also become better at reading when not to joke at all. Some moments call for stillness, not levity, for seriousness, not deflection. Knowing when humor would undercut the emotional weight of a situation is just as important as knowing when it can lighten it, because in the invisible world of social rules, humor is not just entertainment. It is a social signal. It reveals awareness, empathy, and belonging in seconds. Adjusting humor based on who is listening is not about censoring yourself. It is about respecting the room you are in. And the people who master that are rarely the loudest or flashiest. but they are almost always the ones others feel most comfortable laughing with. Knowing when advice feels like judgment. There is a moment when someone tells you about a problem they are dealing with. They sound frustrated, maybe tired, maybe overwhelmed, and almost automatically, something clicks in your brain. You see the solution, you know what they should do, so you say it. Clear, logical, helpful, and the second the words land, the mood changes. Here's the shock. Advice often feels like judgment, even when it is correct, even when it is asked for indirectly, even when it comes from a place of care. The human brain does not hear advice as neutral information. It hears it as evaluation. The invisible rule is this: advice is only welcome when the other person feels emotionally validated first. Without that foundation, even gentle suggestions can feel like criticism of their intelligence, choices, or character. Psychologically, advice triggers a threat response when someone already feels vulnerable. When a person shares a problem, they are often not asking for a fix. They are signaling distress. If the first thing they receive is a solution, their brain interprets it as you see this as simple, which implies they failed at something obvious. That implication hurts, even if unspoken. This is why people so often respond to advice with defensiveness. They explain, they justify, they push back, not because your advice was wrong, but because it landed as judgment of how they have handled their life so far. The punishment for missing this rule is subtle but lasting. People stop bringing you problems. They stop sharing early. They keep things surface level. You become the person who is logical but not safe, helpful but not comforting. And those are not the same thing socially. What makes this rule especially confusing is that advice is culturally framed as kindness. We are taught that helping means solving. So when advice is rejected, it feels unfair. You are trying to help, but social connection is not built on efficiency. It is built on emotional attunement. High social intelligence means knowing when advice supports and when it undermines. The difference is timing and framing. Before advice can land safely, the other person needs to feel understood, not managed. That usually means reflecting feelings, not fixing problems. Think about the difference between saying you should do this and saying that sounds exhausting. I can see why you are stuck. One centers your solution. The other centers their experience. Only after that validation does advice stop feeling like judgment and start feeling like collaboration. There is also a power dynamic hidden here. Advice from someone perceived as more competent, older, or higher status carries extra weight. Even casual suggestions can feel like verdicts. What you intend as help may be received as assessment. This rule shows up everywhere. Friendships, relationships, workplaces, family, parents advising adult children, managers advising employees, partners advising each other. Advice without emotional alignment creates distance even when it is accurate. The brain is not asking, is this advice correct? It is asking, do you see me as capable? Advice given too quickly answers no, even if you never meant that. This is especially punishing for people who are problem solvers by nature. You show care by fixing. You listen by thinking ahead. But others experience care through empathy first. When that mismatch happens repeatedly, they withdraw. The shift happens when you pause before offering solutions. You ask yourself what is actually being asked for right now: relief, validation, perspective, or a fix. Often, it is not the fix. Socially fluent people often ask permission before advising. Do you want my thoughts, or do you just need to vent? That one sentence restores autonomy. It turns advice from judgment into choice. And when advice is given, they soften it. They frame it as possibility, not correction. Something that might help, one option, not the obvious answer. That framing preserves dignity. Once you internalize this rule, your relationships change. People open up more. They trust you with unfinished thoughts. They do not brace when they speak. They feel supported rather than evaluated. You also notice when others break this rule, how quickly conversations shut down, how advice can feel sharp even when wrapped in kindness. You start seeing why some people are avoided in moments of vulnerability. Because in the invisible world of social rules, advice is not about intelligence. It is about timing, tone, and emotional safety. Knowing when advice feels like judgment is the difference between being helpful and being trusted. And trust, not correctness, is what keeps people coming back to you when life gets messy. Not showing boredom, even when you are. There is a moment your body gives you away before your mouth ever does. Your eyes drift. Your posture collapses slightly. Your responses get shorter. You are still physically present, but mentally you have checked out. And even if you never say it, everyone around you can feel it. Here's the shock. Boredom is contagious, and showing it is one of the fastest ways to lower your social value in a room. Not because boredom is immoral or fake, but because displaying it signals disinterest in people, not just content, and humans take that personally. The invisible rule is this: you are expected to manage your visible engagement, even when you are not internally engaged. Social spaces run on mutual effort. The moment you visibly withdraw, you are silently breaking the contract. Psychologically, humans are wired to scan for cues of inclusion and exclusion. When someone looks bored, the brain does not interpret it as neutral. It interprets it as rejection. You are not interesting me. You are not worth my attention. That interpretation happens automatically, even if no one says it out loud. This is why showing boredom feels harsher than silence or neutrality. Silence can be thoughtful. Stillness can be respectful. Boredom feels dismissive. It places you above the interaction, as if you are enduring something beneath you. The punishment for violating this rule is subtle but immediate. People shorten conversations with you. They stop elaborating. They stop inviting you into moments that require emotional energy. You may not be excluded aggressively, but you become optional. Peripheral. What makes this rule especially cruel is that boredom is often honest. You did not choose the conversation. The topic does not interest you. You are tired, but social intelligence is not about honesty at all times. It is about protecting shared emotional space. High social fluency means understanding that attention is a gift. Even temporary, even performative attention communicates respect. You are saying I am here with you, even if this moment is not centered on me. That signal matters more than the topic itself. Think about how people respond when they feel listened to. They relax. They open up. They like you more, even if you barely spoke. Contrast that with how people respond when they feel tolerated. They shut down. They rush. They disengage. Boredom is especially dangerous in group settings. One person visibly checking out gives others permission to do the same. The energy collapses, and even if you are not the leader, the group subconsciously attributes that collapse to you. You become the emotional leak. This rule also explains why some people seem magnetic without saying much. They are attentive. They maintain eye contact. They nod. They react just enough. They are not deeply fascinated, but they are present. That presence is felt. The brain does not ask, "Are you entertained?" It asks, "Do you care?" Visible boredom answers no. And once that answer is registered, people protect themselves by pulling back. This is especially punishing for analytical or introverted people. You conserve energy by disengaging. You assume neutrality is invisible, but socially, neutrality is rarely neutral. It is read, interpreted, remembered. The shift happens when you stop treating engagement as a reflection of your interest and start treating it as a reflection of your respect. You do not have to fake excitement. You just have to avoid signaling dismissal. That means controlling small cues, keeping your body oriented toward the speaker, responding with full sentences instead of fragments, avoiding scanning the room or checking out mentally in visible ways. These are not performances, they are social maintenance. Once you internalize this rule, interactions change. People stay open longer. Conversations flow more easily. You are included more often, not because you are the most interesting person, but because you make others feel interesting enough. You also start noticing who violates this rule. The person who looks past you mid-sentence. The one who sighs, slouches, or checks out while you speak. You feel the sting instantly. That is what others feel too. This rule does not mean you must endure everything indefinitely. You can still exit conversations. You can still set boundaries. But until you leave, you are expected to be present. Half presence is worse than absence, because in the invisible world of social rules, boredom is not just an internal state. It is a social signal. Not showing it, even when you are bored, is not fake. It is considerate. And the people who master that skill quietly become the ones others want around, because they understand a truth most miss. How you make people feel in small moments matters more than how entertained you are by them. Avoiding topics that kill the vibe. There is a moment when a conversation is flowing effortlessly. People are relaxed. Energy is light. Maybe there is laughter, maybe just an easy rhythm, and then someone drops a topic that sucks the air out of the room. Politics. Death. A heavy personal issue. A bleak observation. Nothing offensive. Nothing technically wrong. Just heavy. You can feel it instantly. The vibe collapses. Here's the shock. Killing the vibe is rarely about what you said. It is about when and where you said it. And socially, that timing mistake is punished far more than people realize. The invisible rule is this: not every truth belongs in every moment. Even important, meaningful topics can feel socially inappropriate if they disrupt the emotional contract of the room. When people gather, there is an unspoken agreement about tone. Violating that agreement makes others feel emotionally ambushed. Humans are constantly regulating collective mood. We do this subconsciously. When someone introduces a heavy topic into a light space, the brain reads it as a threat to group comfort. Even if everyone agrees with you, even if the topic matters, people feel forced to shift emotional gears without consent. That sudden shift creates resistance. Psychologically, this is about emotional labor. Heavy topics demand energy. They require processing opinions, feelings, and sometimes vulnerability. When people are not prepared for that, they feel burdened. And the person who introduced the topic becomes associated with that burden. The punishment for breaking this rule is subtle, but immediate. People stop engaging as freely. Responses shorten. Someone changes the subject. Someone checks their phone. You may not be confronted, but you are quietly labeled as someone who brings heaviness into spaces meant for ease. What makes this rule especially confusing is that many vibe-killing topics are important, socially relevant, deep, intelligent. So when people pull away, it feels unfair. Why can't we talk about real things? Why does everything have to be shallow? But social fluency is not about depth alone. It is about pacing. There is a time for depth and a time for lightness. Mixing them without awareness creates friction. People do not resist seriousness. They resist being dragged into it unexpectedly. Think about a group laughing and someone suddenly brings up a depressing news story, or a casual hangout where someone starts venting intensely about personal trauma. Even if everyone cares, the emotional whiplash is real. The room did not opt into that level of gravity. High social intelligence is knowing when a space is for release versus processing. Light spaces help people recover from stress. Heavy spaces help people make sense of it. Confusing the two can make you seem emotionally unaware, even if you are emotionally deep. This rule is especially punishing for thoughtful people. You notice patterns. You think about the bigger picture. You want meaningful conversation. But without consent, meaning feels intrusive. Depth needs invitation. Notice people who are socially smooth. They rarely introduce heavy topics abruptly. They test the waters. They make small comments and watch reactions. They sense when the group is open to shifting tone. If the energy resists, they let it go. There is also a status element here. People with high social power can sometimes break this rule and still be tolerated. People without that buffer are punished more quickly. The same comment lands differently depending on who says it. The brain prioritizes emotional safety over intellectual value. So even a brilliant point can feel unwelcome if it threatens the group's mood. That does not mean the group is shallow. It means the group is protecting its emotional equilibrium. This rule also explains why some people are slowly excluded from social gatherings. Not because they are rude or negative, but because they consistently shift the mood downward. Others start to associate them with heaviness. Invitations become fewer, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. The shift happens when you start asking one quiet question before speaking, "What is this space for right now?" Connection, relaxation, distraction, or depth. When your topic aligns with the purpose of the space, it lands. When it does not, it repels. Avoiding vibe-killing topics does not mean suppressing yourself forever. It means choosing the right container. One-on-one conversations, quieter moments, explicitly serious settings. Those spaces welcome heaviness. Casual group settings often do not. Once you internalize this rule, social friction drops dramatically. People relax around you. Conversations flow longer. You are seen as emotionally aware rather than emotionally heavy. You also become better at creating depth intentionally. Instead of dropping heavy topics randomly, you invite them. You say something like, "I have been thinking about something deeper. Is this a good time?" That consent changes everything, because in the invisible world of social rules, mood is not trivial. It is the glue holding interactions together. Avoiding topics that kill the vibe is not about avoiding truth. It is about respecting emotional timing. And the people who master that are not shallow. They are skilled. They know that connection comes first, and depth follows only when the room is ready for it. Understanding unspoken dress expectations. There is a moment that happens before anyone speaks to you. Before you open your mouth. Before your personality has a chance to do any work, you walk into a room and something is decided instantly. You can feel it in the way eyes scan you for half a second longer than usual. In the way conversation either opens or tightens, and you might not realize it, but your clothes just spoke for you. Here is the shock. Dress codes are rarely stated, but they are always enforced. And when you miss them, the punishment is social, not verbal. No one pulls you aside. No one explains what went wrong. You are simply treated a little differently. The invisible rule is this: every environment has an unspoken visual agreement, and you are expected to intuit it without being told. Dress too casual, and you seem unserious. Dress too formal, and you seem out of place or performative. Dress too expressive, and you risk being read as attention-seeking. Dress too neutral, and you disappear. There is a narrow emotional lane you are meant to stay inside. Humans are pattern-recognizing machines. We use appearance as a shortcut to assess belonging. Does this person understand the norms here? Do they get us? Clothing answers those questions instantly, long before behavior does. When your appearance clashes with the environment, it creates friction. People do not consciously judge you. Their nervous system just flags mismatch. Psychologically, this is about group cohesion. Shared visual norms signal safety. They say we are aligned. When someone violates those norms, even accidentally, it introduces uncertainty. And humans respond to uncertainty by distancing, not explaining. This is why showing up underdressed to a professional setting hurts more than overdressing. Underdressing signals you did not take this seriously. Overdressing signals you may be trying to assert status. Both disrupt the emotional balance of the room. The punishment is subtle but cumulative. People give you fewer leadership cues. They explain things more slowly. They include you less in informal conversations. You are not rejected outright. You are quietly recategorized. What makes this rule especially unfair is that it is never clearly taught. Dress codes are often framed as about formality, but they are actually about signaling awareness. The question is not, are you dressed well? It is, do you understand where you are? Think about how different the same outfit feels in different contexts. A hoodie at a startup meeting versus a boardroom. A bold outfit at a party versus a family gathering. The clothes did not change. The social meaning did. High social intelligence is about reading the room before you enter it. Who holds power here? What level of seriousness is expected? Is this space about creativity, authority, relaxation, or tradition? Clothing is your way of saying, I see the rules, even if no one said them out loud. Notice people who move smoothly between different worlds. Their style shifts slightly each time, not dramatically, just enough. They do not lose themselves. They adapt. That adaptability is read as competence, not conformity. There is also a hierarchy element. People with higher status can break dress expectations and still be accepted. People with less status cannot. The same outfit that looks eccentric on one person looks inappropriate on another. That is not fair, but it is real. This rule is especially punishing for people who value authenticity. You want to dress like yourself everywhere. But social life is not a personal brand showcase. It is a shared space. Understanding unspoken dress expectations is about respect, not self-betrayal. The shift happens when you stop asking, what do I want to wear, and start asking, what does this environment expect visually? You then adjust within that frame. You keep your identity, but you meet the room halfway. Once you understand this, anxiety drops. You stop wondering why interactions feel off. You realize it was never about your personality. It was about first impressions created before you even spoke. You also start noticing how much grace people extend to those who dress appropriately. They are assumed competent. They are given the benefit of the doubt. They are listened to more generously, all without saying a word. This rule also explains why people say dress for the role you want. It is not about ambition. It is about signaling readiness. Clothing communicates whether you understand the norms of a space well enough to belong at the next level. Understanding unspoken dress expectations does not mean becoming boring or blending into the background completely. It means knowing which rules you can bend and which ones will cost you. It means choosing intentional deviation instead of accidental mismatch. Because in the invisible world of social rules, clothes are not just fabric. They are context. They tell people whether you are aligned or out of sync before you ever speak. And the people who master that do not stand out loudly. They fit in smoothly. They move through rooms with less resistance, not because they are better dressed, but because they understood something most people learn only after being quietly excluded. Not asking someone to repeat themselves too many times. There is a moment when someone says something and you miss it. Maybe the room is loud. Maybe your mind drifted for half a second. Maybe they spoke softly. You ask them to repeat it. Totally normal. They repeat themselves. And then it happens again. You still do not catch it. You ask once more. And suddenly the energy shifts. Here is the shock. Asking someone to repeat themselves too many times does not feel neutral to them. Even when it is unintentional, it starts to feel like dismissal, incompetence, or disrespect. And people react to that feeling quietly, not verbally. The invisible rule is this: you are allowed a small margin of misunderstanding, but repeated requests signal a lack of presence. The other person does not think you are hard of hearing. Their brain jumps to something more personal. You were not paying attention. What I said did not matter. I am not worth the effort. Humans are deeply sensitive to being heard. Being listened to is one of the fastest ways we assess whether someone respects us. When someone has to repeat themselves multiple times, it triggers a subtle social threat. Their nervous system registers it as a failure of connection. Psychologically, this ties into validation. When we speak, we expect acknowledgement. Not just comprehension, but effort. Asking once feels human. Asking repeatedly feels like friction. The listener seems disengaged or careless, even if that is not true. The punishment for violating this rule is subtle but immediate. People shorten what they say to you. They stop offering details. They may even avoid conversations that require explanation. Not out of anger, but out of self-protection. They are reducing the emotional cost of not being heard. What makes this rule especially unfair is that there are many innocent reasons you might miss something. Noise, accents, speed, anxiety, processing differences. But social perception does not account for those nuances. People respond to how interactions feel, not why they happened. This rule shows up everywhere, in meetings, when someone explains a point and you keep asking them to clarify the same part. In casual conversations, when you miss punchlines or details. In relationships, when a partner feels like they are repeating the same thing over and over. The emotional response is the same. Frustration mixed with withdrawal. High social intelligence is not about perfect hearing or flawless attention. It is about managing the moment once you realize you missed something. Instead of repeatedly asking what, you adapt. You ask a more targeted question. You paraphrase what you think you heard. You say, "I might have missed part of that. You said X, right?" That signals effort, not absence. Notice skilled listeners. They rarely ask someone to repeat the exact same sentence multiple times. They fill in gaps. They infer. They confirm gently. That keeps the conversational flow intact and preserves the speaker's dignity. There is also an ego element here. When someone repeats themselves, they feel exposed. Especially in groups, Each repetition feels like another moment of scrutiny. Are they unclear? Are they boring? Are they not communicating well? Even if those thoughts are unconscious, they shape behavior. This rule is especially punishing for people who are mentally multitasking. You think you are following along, but your attention is split. The moment you ask for repetition, the gap becomes visible, and visibility is what makes people uncomfortable. The shift happens when you start treating attention as something you actively demonstrate, not something you assume is implied. That means making eye contact when someone speaks, reducing distractions, giving small acknowledgments that show you are tracking. Those cues prevent the need for repetition in the first place. And when you do miss something, you manage it gracefully. You do not default to sorry what. You take responsibility for the gap. You say, I lost that last part, or can you clarify this piece? That framing preserves respect. It tells the other person the issue was not their communication, but the moment. Once you internalize this rule, conversations become smoother. People speak more freely around you. They feel heard. They feel valued. Even when misunderstandings happen, they are repaired quickly instead of accumulating emotional residue. You also become more aware of how it feels when others break this rule with you. The slight irritation, the sense of being background noise. That awareness sharpens your own social timing. This rule does not mean you should pretend to understand when you do not. That creates bigger problems later. It means being strategic about how often and how you ask for repetition. One clear, thoughtful clarification is far safer than multiple vague ones, because in the invisible world of social rules, listening is not passive. It is performative in the best sense. It signals care, respect, and presence. Not asking someone to repeat themselves too many times is not about pride or impatience. It is about protecting the feeling that what they said mattered. And when people feel that, they stay open to you. Knowing when enthusiasm feels fake, there is a version of you that shows up automatically in social situations. Your voice lifts. Your reactions get bigger. You smile a little wider than you feel. You nod faster. You say that's amazing even when it barely registers. And most of the time, it works. Until it doesn't. Because there is a moment when enthusiasm stops reading as warmth and starts reading as performance. And people feel it immediately, even if they cannot explain why. Here's the shock. Fake enthusiasm is more uncomfortable than low energy. Humans are far better at detecting emotional mismatch than they are at tolerating silence or neutrality. When your excitement does not match the moment, it triggers distrust, not appreciation. The invisible rule is this: enthusiasm must be proportionate to context, or it becomes suspicious. Too much excitement too fast feels like manipulation, insecurity, or emotional pressure. And once someone senses that, they instinctively pull back. Psychologically, humans are wired to look for emotional congruence. We expect facial expression, tone, and intensity to align with the situation. When they do not, the brain flags it as inauthentic. Not consciously, viscerally. That gut feeling people get when something feels off. This is why overly enthusiastic reactions often make people uncomfortable. They feel watched, evaluated, or subtly pushed to match your energy. Even positive pressure is still pressure. Think about someone sharing something small, like a minor update or casual thought. You respond with exaggerated excitement. Oh my God, that's incredible. Their nervous system tightens. They feel they now have to justify your reaction or live up to it. Instead of feeling seen, they feel spotlighted. The punishment for missing this rule is subtle but real. People share less. They downplay things around you. They become more reserved. Not because you were mean, but because your reactions feel unsafe. Too big, too loaded, too demanding emotionally. What makes this rule especially confusing is that we are taught enthusiasm equals kindness. Be supportive. Be positive. Be excited for others. And that is true, but only when the excitement feels earned and aligned. Forced enthusiasm feels like emotional noise. High social intelligence is about restraint. You let moments breathe. You respond in a way that mirrors the emotional weight of what was shared. Light news gets light enthusiasm. Heavy news gets grounded presence. Big wins get real celebration. Calibration is everything. There is also an insecurity layer here. People often overperform enthusiasm to cover discomfort. They are unsure what to say. They want to be liked. They want to avoid seeming indifferent, so they inflate their reactions. Ironically, that inflation is what creates distance. The brain does not ask, are they being nice? It asks, are they being real? And when the answer is unclear, people protect themselves by pulling back. This rule shows up constantly in professional settings. Over-enthusiastic agreement can sound like sucking up. Excessive excitement about ideas can feel disingenuous. Leaders who react too strongly to everything lose credibility because people stop trusting the signal. If everything is amazing, nothing is. It also shows up in friendships. When someone vents and you respond with upbeat positivity, it feels dismissive. When someone shares something ordinary and you treat it like a milestone, it feels patronizing. The intent is support. The impact is discomfort. The punishment is rarely direct. No one says stop being fake. They simply stop opening up. They stop inviting emotional depth. Interactions stay shallow because deeper sharing feels risky around exaggerated reactions. The shift happens when you realize enthusiasm is not about volume. It is about accuracy. Saying that makes sense, or I'm glad you told me, can feel more authentic than an over-the-top response. Calm presence often reads as more supportive than loud positivity. Notice people who feel grounding to be around. They are not flat. They are not cold. But their reactions fit. You never feel overwhelmed by their response. You never feel like you have to perform back. Their enthusiasm feels selective, which makes it trustworthy. There is also a timing element. Real enthusiasm builds. It does not explode instantly. When someone reacts too quickly and too strongly, it feels rehearsed. When enthusiasm grows as the story unfolds, it feels earned. This rule is especially punishing for people who are naturally expressive. You feel things strongly. You react outwardly. The key is not suppressing that, but modulating it. Let your reaction reflect your actual level of engagement, not the one you think is socially required. Once you internalize this, social interactions get easier. You stop feeling like you have to perform support. You trust that presence is enough, and people relax around you because they no longer feel managed emotionally. You also become better at reading others. You notice when their enthusiasm feels inflated, when they are trying too hard, when their reactions are mismatched, and you understand the discomfort instead of internalizing it. Because in the invisible world of social rules, enthusiasm is a signal, not a requirement. When it feels fake, it erodes trust faster than indifference ever could. Knowing when enthusiasm crosses that line is about emotional honesty and calibration. And the people who master that are not the loudest cheerleaders in the room, but they are the ones whose reactions people believe. Avoiding being too available socially. There is a strange moment that catches people off guard. You answer every message quickly. You say yes whenever you are invited. You rearrange your schedule to fit others. You show up consistently, reliably, enthusiastically. And instead of being appreciated more, something shifts. Invitations slow down. Responses get colder. You start feeling oddly taken for granted. Here is the shock. Being too available socially does not read as kindness. It reads as low value. And socially, that perception quietly costs you influence, respect, and desire. The invisible rule is this: availability must be balanced with selectivity. When you are always accessible, always responsive, always willing, people stop feeling chosen by you. They start feeling like they had no competition. And the human brain does not assign value to what feels unlimited. This is not about playing games or being fake. It is about how scarcity shapes perception. Psychologically, we value what feels earned. When access to you requires nothing, it feels weightless. When your time seems protected, it feels meaningful. The punishment for breaking this rule is subtle but persistent. People assume you have less going on. They prioritize others first. They feel less urgency to respond. You become the backup plan without ever agreeing to be one. What makes this rule especially painful is that it contradicts what we are taught. Be open, be available, be supportive. Show up for people, and emotionally, that advice makes sense. Socially, it only works when it is paired with boundaries. Humans subconsciously assess social worth through opportunity cost. If you always say yes, the cost of choosing you feels low. If you occasionally say no, people register that spending time with you requires intention. That intention creates value. Think about how people treat those who seem constantly busy. Not unavailable, just occupied. Their time feels structured. When they make space for you, it feels deliberate. That feeling strengthens connection. High social intelligence is knowing that warmth without boundaries feels unstable. It signals that you may be seeking approval or fearing exclusion. Even if that is not true, perception drives behavior. There is also a power dynamic at play. Availability shifts the balance. When one person is always ready and the other is not, the less available person unconsciously gains leverage. They decide timing. They decide pacing. Over time, that imbalance changes how both people feel. This rule shows up in friendships, dating, and professional relationships. Texting back immediately every time can feel eager. Saying yes to every hangout can feel desperate. Always being free can quietly lower your perceived status. Not because people are cruel, but because their brains are wired to equate demand with worth. The punishment is rarely intentional. People do not think I value you less. They simply stop protecting the relationship. They cancel more easily. They delay responses. They assume you will still be there. What hurts most is that the available person often feels invisible. You are present, but not prioritized. Reliable, but not chosen. And that creates resentment that is hard to name. The shift happens when you stop measuring your worth by responsiveness. You allow yourself to be unavailable sometimes. Not cold, not distant. Just occupied with your own life. You let messages wait. You decline invitations occasionally. You protect your time without apologizing excessively. Notice how people react when you do this. Some will lean in more. They will make clearer plans. They will show more intention. The ones who disappear were not responding to you. They were responding to access. This rule is especially difficult for people who fear being forgotten. It feels risky to pull back. But paradoxically, strategic absence makes presence more impactful. When you are not always there, your presence carries weight. Socially fluent people understand pacing. They respond, but not instantly every time. They show interest, but not urgency. They are warm, but not endlessly accommodating. That balance signals self-respect. There is also a difference between being available and being accessible. You can be emotionally open without being constantly reachable. You can care deeply without rearranging your entire life for others. Once you internalize this rule, your social dynamics change. People respect your time more. Plans feel more mutual. You stop feeling like you are chasing connection. Instead, it meets you halfway. You also start noticing how much energy you were spending trying to be chosen. How often you were over-giving access instead of letting it be earned. That awareness is freeing. Avoiding being too available socially is not about withholding yourself. It is about signaling that your life is full, your time is valuable, and connection with you is intentional. Because in the invisible world of social rules, people do not respond to how much you give. They respond to how you give it. And when your availability has shape and limits, it stops feeling cheap and starts feeling meaningful.